Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The sky lit up just enough that I checked my mirrors, expecting to see headlights behind me. There weren't any. It was a soft brightening, like distant lightning reflecting off clouds, except the sky was completely clear. No clouds, no storm on the forecast. Just a pale, quick wash of light across the horizon ahead of me, gone almost as soon as I noticed it. I was driving north on Route 17, cutting through farmland on my way back to my apartment in Benton Falls. It was a little after 10 p.m., late enough that traffic had thinned out to nothing. I'd been at my sister Lauren's place for dinner, stayed longer than I meant to, and now I was paying for it with a quiet, slightly hypnotic drive home. The light faded, and everything went back to normal. I told myself it had to be heat lightning from some storm miles away. That happens sometimes. You see flashes even when the sky overhead is clear. Still, something about it bothered me. The light hadn't flickered or streaked, it had just appeared. Even. Flat. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 10:14. I drove on. The road was straight for miles, cutting through cornfields on both sides. The plants were tall this time of year, black walls under the moonlight. Every so often I passed a dirt road or a mailbox, but otherwise there was nothing to break up the view. No houses, no barns, no streetlights. Just my headlights and the reflective paint on the asphalt pulling me forward. About a minute later, the sky brightened again. This time it was a little stronger. Still no clouds, still no sound. Just that same pale glow spreading across the horizon ahead of me, like someone had turned on a massive distant light behind the fields. I slowed without really thinking about it. The glow lingered for maybe 2 seconds longer than before, then faded out smoothly. Not snapping back to dark, but easing away. My hands felt tight on the steering wheel. "Okay," I said, alone in the car. "Okay." I checked the weather app on my phone at the next straight stretch, holding it low so the screen wouldn't ruin my night vision. Clear skies all night, no storms within 100 miles. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and focused on the road again. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Not just the radio, I'd turned that off earlier because I was tired of commercials, but everything. The low hum of the tires seemed muted. Even the engine noise felt distant, like it was coming through a wall. I rolled the window down a crack. Warm summer air pushed in, smelling faintly of soil and leaves. Crickets were chirping somewhere out in the fields. The sound of the car came back to normal. I rolled the window up again, and the quiet returned. That unsettled me more than the lights. A few minutes later, the sky flashed a third time, brighter than before. The glow spread farther this time, reaching up into the sky, washing the underside of the moon in a thin haze. I instinctively ducked a little as if brightness alone could hit me, and then it was gone. I took a sharp breath and checked the clock again. 10:23. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I was sure it had been 10:14 after the first flash. There was no way 9 minutes had passed. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't slowed that much. I told myself I must have misread it earlier. Except the road didn't feel right anymore. That's the only way I can describe it. The asphalt ahead looked the same faded yellow lines, same cracks and patches, but something about it felt off, like I was driving through a replica of a place I knew well. The curves didn't match what my body expected. The distance between the occasional reflectors felt wrong. Even the way my headlights fell across the road seemed slightly misaligned. I slowed to 40. My chest felt tight, like I just missed a step on the stairs and my body was still bracing for impact. I passed a sign for County Road H. I knew that sign. Or at least I should have, but seeing it there felt wrong, like it was out of order. Too early, or too late. I couldn't tell which. I checked my phone again. The signal bars flickered, dropped to 0, then came back. The map app showed me exactly where I expected to be, a blue dot moving steadily north. Everything looked normal on the screen. The world outside didn't match that certainty. The cornfield seemed closer to the road now, leaning in. The darkness between the rows felt deeper. The air inside the car felt heavier, like the pressure had changed. I reached out and adjusted the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something behind me. Nothing. Just the empty road stretching back, my taillights glowing red against the black. I drove another mile like that, tense and hyper-aware, waiting for something else to happen. Then the road dipped. Not a big hill, just a shallow rise and fall that I'd driven over 1,000 times. Except this time, as my headlights angled downward, they caught something I didn't expect. The road ahead looked unfinished. For just a second, the asphalt seemed smoother, darker, almost glossy, like fresh pavement that hadn't been worn in yet. The center lines were brighter too, cleaner, as if they'd been painted recently. Then I crested the dip and everything snapped back to normal. I slammed my foot off the gas and nearly drifted onto the shoulder. My heart was hammering now. I could hear it in my ears. I pulled over at the next gravel turnout, tires crunching loudly in the sudden quiet. I put the car in park and just sat there, hands shaking slightly on the wheel. I checked the clock again, 10:23. Still, I checked my phone. No missed calls, no notifications, no gaps in the timeline that I could see. According to everything measurable, time was behaving normally. I got out of the car. The night air felt thick, heavy against my skin. The fields stretched out on both sides, rustling faintly. The sky was clear and star-filled, calm and indifferent. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the horizon. Nothing unusual, no glow, no lights, no movement. I stood there for maybe a minute, grounding myself in the normal sounds and smells. When my breathing finally slowed, I got back in the car and pulled onto the road again. The rest of the drive passed without incident. The road felt familiar again. The signs were where they should be. The curves matched my expectations. By the time I reached the edge of town, I'd almost convinced myself I'd just been overtired and spooked by nothing. Almost. When I parked outside my apartment and shut the engine off, the sudden silence felt too loud. I sat there a moment longer, staring at the dashboard. The clock still read 10:23. I turned the key again, just to see if it would reset. The engine started. The clock blinked, then changed. 10:32. 9 minutes jumped forward instantly. My stomach dropped. I shut the car off again and got out, locking it with shaking hands. Inside my apartment, everything felt normal. My cat lifted her head from the couch and flicked her tail, annoyed I was late. The clock on the microwave read 10:33. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time, replaying the drive in my head, trying to account for every minute. I couldn't. The next morning, I drove that same stretch of Route 17 in daylight. Nothing looked out of place. The road dip was just a dip. The paint lines were worn and faded like always. County Road H was exactly where it should be. But every time I drive that way at night now, I watch the sky ahead of me. And every so often, when the road is quiet and the fields close in, I get this brief sense that I'm about to cross into somewhere else. Some version of the road that doesn't quite line up with the one I know. Nothing has lit up the sky since that night. But my car clock runs 9 minutes fast now. I've reset it 3 times, it never stays. I was sitting on the roof because it was the only place the mosquitoes couldn't really get to me. My house is a 1-story place at the edge of town, with a shallow pitch and shingles rough enough to sit on without sliding. I'd been doing it for years, drag a lawn chair up there, set a thermos next to me, and watch the sky. I wasn't into astrology or anything, I just liked satellites. They were predictable. Clean little lines of light crossing the dark, doing exactly what they were supposed to do. That night was late August, still warm after sunset, but finally cooling off. No clouds, no wind. The kind of sky that makes you feel small in a calm way. I'd been up there maybe half an hour, counting satellites the way some people count planes. I'd already spotted a few, slow, steady points gliding west to east, fading as they hit Earth's shadow. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed one that seemed hesitant. At first, I thought my eyes were tired. The point of light was faint, near the southern edge of my view, moving along a path I'd seen dozens of times before. But something about it felt off. It wasn't quite as smooth as the others. It slowed slightly, then picked up again. I leaned forward in the chair, elbows on my knees, tracking it. It slowed again. I checked my watch, not sure why. Habit, maybe. 10:47 p.m. The satellite crept forward another inch across the sky, then stopped. Not faded, Not blinked out. Stopped. It hung there, motionless against the stars. I waited for it to dim, expecting it to vanish into shadow, but it stayed bright. Too bright, actually. The contrast made it easier to see than it should have been. I frowned and muttered, "That's not right." Satellites don't stop. Even the slow ones don't just freeze in place like a cursor on a paused video. I shifted in my chair, trying to steady my perspective. Maybe it only looked stopped because it was moving directly toward or away from me. That happens sometimes. It's an illusion. Except then, it started moving backward. Not drifting, not wobbling. Moving back along the same path it had just traveled, like someone rewinding it. I felt a cold tightness creep into my chest. The movement was smooth and controlled, the same speed it had been going forward, just reversed. It passed stars it had already crossed, retracing its exact route. I sat perfectly still, afraid that if I moved, I'd lose track of it or break whatever fragile alignment was letting me see this. My skin prickled. The night felt too quiet. Even the usual distant highway noise seemed muted. The satellite reversed for maybe 3 seconds. Then it stopped again. I swallowed hard and glanced around the sky, half expecting to see something else moving. Another light, another shape. But everything else stayed normal. Other satellites continued on their paths. Planes blinked red and white far off to the north. The stars didn't care. Only that one point of light was wrong. It sat there, perfectly still. I realized my breathing was shallow, almost held. I forced myself to take a deeper breath, and when I did, I noticed something else. A faint vibration through the roof beneath me. Not strong enough to rattle anything, just a soft hum like standing near a distant generator. I put my palm flat against the shingles. The vibration was real. I looked back at the light. It was still there. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I lifted my phone and aimed the camera at the sky. I didn't zoom. I just held it steady, hoping the point of light would show up. The screen showed stars, but not the satellite. I lowered the phone, heart thudding harder now, and stared at the sky again. The light was still there, plain as day. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." The vibration under my hand faded. The roof felt solid and dead again. I sat there another long moment, watching that point of light hang in place, refusing to behave. Then, without really deciding to, I looked away. Just a quick glance down toward my backyard, at the dark outline of the shed and the faint glow from my kitchen window. Maybe a second at most. When I looked back up, the satellite was moving normally again. Same direction as before, same steady speed. No hesitation, no reversal, just another obedient object sliding across the sky. I stared after it until it faded into Earth's shadow and disappeared. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, I checked my watch again, 10:49 p.m. 2 minutes had passed. I climbed down from the roof, slower than usual, my hands shaking just enough to notice. Inside, the house felt too quiet, even though everything was normal. Refrigerator humming, clock ticking, the familiar creak of the hallway floorboard. I sat at the kitchen table and tried to reason it out. Perspective illusion, eye fatigue, some weird coincidence of orbital geometry. But I couldn't get past the reversal. I'd seen satellites flare, vanish, change brightness. I'd never seen one go backward. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening, I went back up to the roof. I told myself I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted to prove it wouldn't happen again. The sky was different, slightly hazy, fewer visible stars. I stayed up there an hour, tracking satellites as usual. Everything behaved. Nothing stopped. Nothing reversed. I relaxed a little. A week passed, then another. I almost forgot about it, or at least pushed it far enough back in my mind that it stopped intruding on normal thoughts. Until one night in mid-September. I was back on the roof, earlier this time just after sunset. The sky was still deep blue, not fully dark yet. I'd spotted one satellite already, faint but visible. Then I saw another. Same area of the sky as before, same path. My stomach dropped before anything even happened. I tracked it carefully as it moved. It didn't hesitate at first. It glided along smoothly, just like it should. Then it slowed. I felt that same tightness in my chest, the same sense of the night holding its breath. It slowed more, stopped. I didn't take my eyes off it this time. The vibration returned under me, faint but unmistakable, like the roof was quietly resonating with something above it. The air felt thick, pressing slightly against my ears. The satellite didn't reverse this time. Instead, it drifted sideways. Not much, just enough to notice. a subtle lateral slide, like it was adjusting its position relative to me rather than following its orbital track. I started shaking. "Don't," I whispered, not sure who or what I was talking to. The light stayed put. I had the sudden, overwhelming sense that it knew I was watching it. Not in a dramatic way. Not like being stared at, more like awareness. Like when you realize someone in a room has noticed you noticing them. My phone buzzed in my pocket, nearly making me fall out of the chair. I yanked it out, breath coming fast. No notification, no missed call. When I looked back up, the satellite was moving normally again. Forward. Steady. Predictable. The vibration faded. I climbed down immediately and didn't look back. I haven't gone up on the roof since. I still look at the sky sometimes, from the yard or through windows. I still see satellites, crossing the dark like they always have. They all move the way they're supposed to. But every now and then, when one passes near that same stretch of sky, I get this urge to look away, to break eye contact before anything has the chance to stop. Because the one time I didn't look away, it didn't act like an object anymore. It acted like something that noticed being watched and adjusted. I woke up because my chest felt wrong. Not pain, not tightness. More like a low vibration, the way your body feels when you're standing near a generator or a truck idling too close. It wasn't loud enough to hear. It was just there, inside me, steady and even. I lay still for a few seconds, trying to figure out if it was coming from somewhere in the house. The heater was off. The fridge was on the other side of the wall, but it didn't cycle like that. The vibration didn't change when I held my breath or shifted my weight. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. I checked my phone. 2:47 a.m. The room was darker than usual. Not pitch black, but flat somehow, like the shadows weren't as deep. My bedroom window faced the backyard, and I could normally see a few stars through the branches of the oak tree back there. This time, I couldn't. I sat up slowly, waiting for the vibration to fade. It didn't. If anything, it felt a little stronger when I moved, like my body was closer to whatever was causing it. I swung my legs off the bed and stood. The floor felt normal, no shaking, no rattling. The vibrations stayed inside my chest, steady as a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to look out. The yard looked normal. Fence, shed, patchy grass I kept meaning to reseed. The sky above it didn't. The stars were there everywhere else I could see them, off to the sides near the horizon, but directly above my house there was a dull patch, like someone had smudged the sky with their thumb. No clouds, no movement, just less light. I leaned closer to the glass, half expecting the reflection of my own face to explain it away. It didn't. The vibration in my chest pulsed once, slightly stronger, then settled back into its steady rhythm. That was when I noticed how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. The usual background stuff was gone. No distant highway noise, no dogs barking, no insects. Even the faint hum of power lines that I'd never consciously noticed before was missing. I stepped back from the window and glanced at the hallway. My wife, Erin, was asleep in the next room. I thought about waking her, then immediately felt stupid for considering it. What would I even say? Hey, the sky looks dim and my chest feels like a washing machine. I stood there another minute, listening to nothing, feeling that vibration fill my ribcage. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No fade, no tapering off. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. My chest felt empty afterward, like the pressure drop after your ears pop. The quiet lifted too. Distant traffic came back. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm chirped once and stopped. Crickets resumed like they'd been paused. I waited for my heart to slow down. It took longer than it should have. I went back to bed and didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I checked the weather out of habit. Clear skies overnight, no clouds, no wind, nothing unusual. I didn't say anything to Erin. It felt too thin to explain in daylight. That night, I went to bed early, telling myself I was just tired. I fell asleep fast. The vibration woke me again. This time it was weaker, like it was farther away. Still unmistakable. Still inside my chest. I checked the time. 2:46 a.m. I didn't go to the window right away. I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. I got up and pulled the curtain back again. The dim patch of sky was back. Same size, same shape, centered directly over the house. The stars beyond it looked normal, sharp, and bright, like the sky had depth everywhere except that one spot. I stepped into the hallway and looked through the front window too. Same thing, the dullness followed the roofline exactly. I felt exposed standing there, even though nothing was moving and nothing was visible. I checked the rest of the house. Aaron slept through everything. The dog, Milo, was curled up on the couch, awake but unusually still. His eyes followed me as I moved, but his tail didn't wag. When I knelt down and called his name softly, he didn't react. He just stared past me toward the ceiling. The vibration pulsed again, stronger this time. I stood up fast, heart racing, and the pulsing stopped. The steady vibration returned, like whatever it was didn't like sudden movement. I don't know why I thought this, but I got the sense that it wasn't coming from above in a straight line. It felt wider, spread out, like the whole house was inside something rather than under it. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, watching the window. The dim patch didn't change. No lights, no shadows, no sound. After maybe 5 minutes, the vibration eased off and vanished again. The sky brightened back to normal at the same time, stars snapping back into clarity like someone adjusted a lens. I slept a little after that, but it was shallow and full of half-dreams. The third night, I didn't wake up. Instead, Erin did. She shook my shoulder around 3 in the morning, whispering my name. "Do you feel that?" she asked. My chest was already vibrating. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. "You too?" I said. She nodded, eyes wide. "It's like, I don't know, like pressure." I didn't tell her about the sky. I just went to the window and pulled the curtain back. The dim patch was there again. Erin sucked in a breath. "Why does it look like that?" Neither of us touched the glass. We just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, staring up. The vibration was stronger than before. Not painful, but insistent, like standing too close to heavy equipment you know you shouldn't be near for long. Erin whispered, "Is it coming from outside?" "I don't know," I said, and meant it. The dog started whining softly from the living room. Not barking, not panicking, just a low, continuous sound that matched the vibration almost perfectly. I checked my phone, 2:47 a.m. The vibration peaked, holding steady for several seconds, then cut out completely. The sky returned to normal. The house settled back into its usual nighttime noises. Erin and I didn't talk much after that. We lay in bed, hands clasped, listening to the normal sounds like they were proof of something. The next morning, she asked if we should call someone. An electrician, a doctor, anyone. We didn't. The vibration didn't come back the next night, or the one after that. A week passed, then 2. I started to convince myself it had been some weird combination of anxiety, coincidence, and sleep disruption. Erin stopped bringing it up. Then, one afternoon, I noticed something while taking the trash out. The grass on the roof-facing side of the house looked different, slightly flattened. Not dead, just pressed down like it had been under something heavy but soft. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring up at the clear blue sky. That night, I dreamed of pressure, of weight without shape. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. to silence, no vibration, no dim sky, but I stayed awake until morning anyway, waiting for something that never came. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel a phantom version of it in my chest, just for a second. Enough to make me stop what I'm doing and listen. The sky looks normal every time I check. I don't know if that means it's gone, or if it just learned when to come back. The water lit up under my kayak without warning. I was halfway across the lake, maybe 50 yards from the nearest shore, drifting more than paddling at that point. It was late summer, just before full dark. The sky still held that washed-out blue-gray color, and the trees around the lake had started to blur into one dark ring. I liked being out at that time because everything slowed down. No jet skis, no kids yelling. Just the sound of water against plastic and the occasional bird settling in for the night. I noticed the glow because it didn't reflect. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. Then I looked straight down and saw the water beneath me glowing a pale greenish white, like someone had turned on a dim light under the surface. Not bright, not dramatic, just enough to see the shape of my paddle blade and the underside of the kayak. The surface of the lake stayed dark, no shimmer, no ripple of light, nothing bouncing back up. It was like the glow stopped exactly at the waterline. I froze, paddle half lifted, and just stared. The glow stayed steady for maybe 5 seconds, long enough that I had time to think this isn't normal, and also long enough to notice what wasn't happening. The water wasn't warming. I couldn't hear anything. No bubbles, no movement from below. Then it faded out, like someone slowly turning a dimmer switch down. The lake went black again. I stayed still, listening. The usual sounds were still there. Crickets starting up along the shore. A frog somewhere to my left. The distant hum of a car on the county road. I told myself it had to be bioluminescence. That was the obvious answer. Except this was a freshwater lake in upstate New York, and I'd kayaked here for years without seeing anything like that. Also, bioluminescence usually reacts to movement. I hadn't moved. I dipped my paddle in gently and stirred the water. Nothing happened. I laughed quietly, more from nerves than humor, and told myself to head back. The light had messed with my sense of distance. The shoreline felt farther away than it had a minute earlier. As I paddled, I kept glancing down, half expecting the glow to come back. It didn't. When I reached the dock near the launch, my hands were shaking a little as I pulled the kayak up. I stood there for a minute, letting the last of the light fade from the sky. Everything looked normal again. I didn't tell anyone about it that night. I went back out the next evening. I told myself it was curiosity, but it was more than that. There was a sense of unfinished business, like I'd walked out of a room too early and missed something important. The lake looked the same, calm, darkening sky, no boats. I paddled out to roughly the same spot, judging by the alignment of two tall pines on the far shore and the low hill to the right. I drifted and waited. Nothing happened. I stayed out longer than usual until the sky was almost fully dark. Still nothing. I finally headed back, feeling embarrassed for expecting anything at all. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, the glow appeared slightly off to the side, not directly beneath me. I noticed it out of the corner of my eye first, like a trick of peripheral vision. When I leaned over and looked straight down, it was there. Same pale light. Same lack of reflection. I held my breath without realizing it. The glow was stronger this time, bright enough that I could see the silt and weeds on the lake bottom, maybe 6 or 7 feet down. I watched carefully, looking for movement. There was none. The glow lasted longer this time, 10 seconds, maybe more. I lifted my paddle slowly and dipped the blade straight down into the glowing water. The light didn't react. That scared me more than if it had. When the glow faded, I paddled back to shore hard, not caring how obvious my panic looked. I didn't stop until the kayak scraped the gravel. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the glow stopping at the water's surface like a ceiling. I skipped the lake for a week. When I finally went back, I brought my friend Mark with me. He was practical, skeptical, and had a habit of talking through things until they made sense. If anyone could ground this, it was him. We went out just before dusk, each in our own kayak. I didn't tell him everything up front. I just said I'd seen something weird and wanted another set of eyes. We drifted near the center of the lake, chatting about work and nothing in particular. Then the water beneath Mark's kayak lit up. "Do you see that?" he said immediately. My stomach dropped. The glow was brighter than I'd ever seen it, wide enough to cover both kayaks. It was the same pale green-white, steady and silent. Mark leaned over, staring. "What the hell is that?" "It doesn't reflect," I said, and hated how calm my voice sounded. He dipped his paddle in. No reaction. The glow stayed on for a long time this time, long enough that Mark pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the water. The flashlight beam hit the surface and reflected normally, completely separate from the glow below. 2 different layers of light, not interacting. "Is it coming from below?" Mark asked. "I don't know," I said, and I really didn't. There was no source, no point of origin, just uniform light. After maybe 20 seconds, the glow dimmed and vanished. Mark sat back, breathing hard. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that's not algae." We paddled back in silence. On shore, Mark kept looking back at the lake like it might do something else. When nothing happened, he finally said, "We should come back with better lights. Maybe a depth finder, something." I nodded, but part of me didn't want answers anymore. Over the next month, the glow became unpredictable. Sometimes it appeared beneath the kayak, sometimes a few feet away. Once I saw it moving slowly under the surface, not fast, just drifting sideways like a cloud sliding beneath the water. It never broke the surface. It never reflected. Once I noticed that the glow seemed to dim when I stood up slightly in the kayak, then brighten again when I crouched lower. That could have been coincidence. I didn't test it again. Mark stopped coming out after the night the glow followed us halfway back to shore, always staying just out of reach like it was keeping pace beneath the water. We didn't talk about that part much. The last time I went out was early fall. Colder air, fog forming low over the lake. I told myself it would be the last time, no matter what happened. The glow appeared almost immediately, brighter than ever. The fog above me stayed dark, untouched. I felt exposed sitting there like I was floating on a thin skin over something vast. Then I noticed the water wasn't making sound anymore. No lapping, no drip from my paddle. The lake was perfectly still, even though I was drifting. I felt pressure in my ears, like descending in an elevator. Not painful, just noticeable. The glow pulsed once, faintly. I panicked then. No screaming, no thrashing, just a sudden, overwhelming need to be anywhere else. I paddled hard toward shore, and the sound of water came back instantly. The glow stayed where it was, not following this time. I didn't look back. I sold the kayak that winter. I still drive past the lake sometimes. It looks normal, calm, unremarkable. But at dusk, if the light hits the water just right, I catch myself watching the surface too closely, waiting to see something that doesn't belong there. I don't miss kayaking. What I miss is the certainty I had before I knew the water could light up without a reason. I found the audio file by accident. I was deleting old voice memos on my phone during lunch, the kind of random cleanup you do when storage warnings start popping up. Most of the recordings were nothing. Half-finished reminders, grocery lists, me testing the mic after an update. Then I saw one I didn't recognize. It was time-stamped 3:18 a.m. The duration was just over 6 minutes. I knew I hadn't recorded anything that night. I lived alone, and I didn't sleepwalk. At least I didn't think I did. I tapped the file, expecting silence or maybe pocket noise. Instead, static came through the speaker. Not loud, but dense, like radio snow. Underneath it was something else. A low, steady sound, repeating in a slow rhythm. I turned the volume up. The static fluctuated, rising and falling, but the rhythm stayed constant. Thump, pause, thump, pause. About once every 2 seconds. It wasn't mechanical exactly, but it was too even to be natural. It reminded me of standing near industrial equipment where you feel the vibration before you hear it. I stopped eating and just listened. About a minute in, the static shifted, thinning out briefly. For a second or two, I thought I heard something like breathing, but distorted, stretched. Then it vanished back into noise. I checked the phone again. No apps showed as having used the microphone overnight. No calls, no notifications, no alerts. That night, I went to bed with my phone face down on the nightstand, volume on max. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. without an alarm. That alone wouldn't have bothered me. I'd woken up at random times before. What bothered me was the feeling in my chest, a faint vibration, almost like a subwoofer rumbling somewhere far away. Not strong enough to shake anything, just enough that I could feel it if I paid attention. I lay still, listening. The house was quiet, no HVAC, no traffic, no wind against the siding. The vibration didn't come through the mattress or the floor. It felt internal, like my ribcage was picking it up directly. I reached for my phone. As soon as I touched it, the vibration stopped. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. I checked the time, 3:17 a.m. I didn't record anything. I told myself the audio file was a glitch, some corrupted process. Phones did weird things sometimes. The next morning, there was a second recording. This one was shorter, 2 minutes, 11 seconds, time-stamped 3:19 a.m. I played it in my car before work. Same static, same low rhythm. Thump, pause, thump. About halfway through, there was a faint clicking sound layered over the rhythm. Not random, structured, like something cycling through positions. I felt stupid sitting there, gripping the steering wheel, listening to noise like it meant something. That night, I left the phone recording on purpose. I set a voice memo, plugged the phone in, and put it face up on the nightstand. I even placed a book on top of it so I wouldn't accidentally touch it in my sleep. I didn't remember falling asleep. I woke up to the sound of nothing. Not silence, nothing. The absence of background noise. It felt like the house had been unplugged from the world. My eyes were open, but the room was darker than it should have been. Not black, just flat. like the shadows had been pressed down. The vibration was back, stronger now. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it demanded attention. Every breath I took seemed to sync with it without me trying. I wanted to move my arm toward the phone. I couldn't. Panic flared, sharp and sudden, but my body didn't respond. I could still breathe, still blink. Everything else felt paused. Then the vibration peaked, just for a moment, and cut out. The room snapped back to normal. I could hear the refrigerator hum again. A car passed somewhere outside. My arm moved when I told it to. I grabbed the phone and stopped the recording with shaking fingers. The file was almost 9 minutes long. I didn't listen to it right away. I went to work exhausted, replaying the feeling of being stuck in my own body. Every time my chest felt even slightly tight, I noticed it. That afternoon, I listened to the recording in my apartment, sitting on the couch with all the lights on. The first 3 minutes were static and the rhythm, same as before. Then the static dropped sharply. The rhythm stayed. In the clearer audio, I could hear something else now. A low tone that wavered slightly, like it was being modulated. It wasn't speech, it didn't have cadence, but it felt intentional, like it was meant to be received, not heard. At 4:12 into the recording, there was a sound that made my stomach turn. It was my name, not spoken clearly. Stretched, flattened, but unmistakable. Once. Then static swallowed everything again. I stood up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. I lived alone. No TV had been on. No neighbors close enough to hear through walls. The voice wasn't even right. It sounded like my name had been pulled apart and put back together wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch until dawn, lights on, phone turned off completely. Nothing happened. The recordings continued anyway, every night. Same time window, same pattern. The vibration waking me up just before, stopping if I moved or touched the phone. The files appearing whether I recorded or not. I tried sleeping at a friend's place. No vibration, no recordings. When I came home, they resumed. I checked carbon monoxide, had the place inspected, took a day off work, and stayed up all night to see if I could catch something. At 3:16 a.m., the air in the apartment felt heavier, not warmer, just thicker, like humidity without moisture. At 3:18, my phone lit up as if recording had started on its own. The vibration followed a second later. I stared at the phone from across the room, heart pounding. The screen showed the waveform moving in real time. I didn't hear anything with my ears, but I felt the rhythm inside my chest, steady and patient. I don't know how long I stood there. The recording ended on its own. When the vibration stopped, the air felt normal again. I moved out 2 weeks later. The new place never recorded anything strange. No vibrations, no static. I kept the old audio files, though, backed them up twice. Sometimes, late at night, I listened to them with headphones on, trying to understand the rhythm, trying to figure out if it's random or structured. Every so often, when the static thins just right, I swear the rhythm changes slightly, like it's adjusting to me listening. I don't play them anymore when I'm alone. The captain's voice came over the intercom while I was stirring powdered creamer into my coffee. Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting a brief patch of turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. That alone wasn't strange. What caught my attention was the tone. He didn't sound rushed or alarmed. He sounded confused, like he was reading something that didn't match what he was seeing. I glanced out the window. We were cruising above a solid layer of white cloud, smooth as a tabletop. The sky above us was clear, deep blue. No bumps, no wing flecks, nothing that suggested turbulence was coming. The seatbelt sign dinged on anyway. A few people around me muttered and complied. I snapped my belt, took another look outside, and waited for the usual shudder. It never came. Instead, the plane went quiet in a way that made my ears pop. Not pressure change exactly, just a sudden dullness, like someone had turned down the ambient noise. The engine still roared, but the sound felt distant, muffled. Then the vibration started, not shaking, more like a low-frequency hum you felt through the seat and your legs. It reminded me of driving over a bridge with evenly spaced seams, except we weren't moving up and down. It was constant. People noticed. A guy across the aisle leaned into the aisle and looked around. A woman behind me asked her partner if he felt that too. Someone laughed nervously. The captain didn't say anything else. The vibration grew stronger for a few seconds, then leveled off. My coffee sloshed slightly but didn't spill. The plane stayed perfectly level, no turbulence in the way anyone understood it. I checked my watch out of habit. It was a cheap analog thing I wore for work. The second hand was moving normally. I remember that clearly because I stared at it, counting beats, trying to ground myself. Then it stopped. Not slowed, not skipped, it just froze mid-tick. I tapped the glass with my fingernail. Nothing. At the same moment, the vibration stopped. The engine noise snapped back to normal. The cabin lighting felt brighter, like my eyes had been adjusting to something dimmer without me realizing it. A few seconds later, the seatbelt sign turned off. The captain came back on. Thanks for your patience, folks. Looks like we're back to smooth air. That was it. No apology. No explanation. People started talking at once. Nervous laughter. Someone clapped sarcastically. Flight attendants unbuckled and went back to the galley like nothing had happened. I looked at my watch again. The second hand was moving. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. My watch was 2 minutes behind. At first, I blamed the watch. Cheap battery, bad timing. I reset it and tried to forget about it. But then the guy across the aisle leaned over. "Hey," he said, holding up his wrist. "Did your watch stop just now?" I felt my stomach tighten. "Yeah. 2 minutes, right?" He nodded slowly. "Exactly 2. A woman a few rows up turned around. "Mine too," she said. "I thought it was just broken." Someone else chimed in from farther back. Then another. By the time the flight attendant came through with drinks, at least 6 of us had realized the same thing. Every watch had stopped for exactly 2 minutes. Not phones. Phones showed no gap, only watches. Digital and analog both. The flight attendant laughed it off when we asked. "Probably just a coincidence," she said. "We didn't feel anything unusual up front." But her smile looked forced, and she avoided eye contact when she moved on. The rest of the flight was uneventful. Clear skies, smooth ride, normal landing. At the gate, people talked about it in hushed voices, like they didn't want to sound crazy in front of strangers. A few joked about time warps. Most shrugged it off. I tried to do the same. A week later, I was on another flight, different airline, different route. Early morning, foggy departure that cleared once we climbed. About an hour in, the captain announced unexpected turbulence again. Clear skies again. This time, I paid close attention. The same dulling of sound, the same low vibration, the same sense that the cabin was sealed inside something else for a moment. I didn't look at my watch until it was over. 2 minutes behind. I didn't talk to anyone this time. I just sat there, heart pounding, pretending to read. After that, it started happening more often. Not every flight, but often enough that I noticed patterns. Always during cruise. Always clear air. Always announced as turbulence that never actually shook the plane. Always 2 minutes. On one flight, I felt bold enough to mention it to a flight attendant I knew from previous trips. Her name was Lauren. She'd been flying for over a decade. She listened carefully, then said, "We don't see anything on our instruments when that happens." "When what happens?" I asked. She hesitated. "Sometimes there's a discrepancy. Clocks don't line up. It's rare." "How rare?" She shook her head. I shouldn't have said anything. The last time it happened was over the ocean. Red-eye flight. Most people asleep. Cabin lights dimmed. The vibration felt stronger that time. Not louder, deeper, like it was coming from below the floor. I closed my eyes without meaning to. When I opened them, the plane felt empty. Not literally empty. Everyone was still there. But there was a sense of space that shouldn't exist inside a metal tube full of people. Like the cabin was bigger than it should be. The vibration stopped. I checked my watch. Stopped. 2 minutes later, it resumed. When we landed, my watch was exactly 2 minutes behind local time. I don't fly as much anymore. When I do, I leave the watch at home. But sometimes, mid-flight, I still feel that low hum in my chest, faint and familiar. When that happens, I keep my eyes open and count silently, waiting for something I don't fully understand to finish passing through us. Every light in the park went out at the same time. I was halfway down the main path, the one that cuts through the center with the old oak trees and the benches that always smell faintly like rain. It was just after 9, late enough that most people were gone, but not so late that it felt unsafe. The sky was overcast, low clouds glowing faintly orange from the city. The air was warm and still, that kind of summer night where sounds carry farther than they should. The lights didn't flicker, they didn't dim. They shut off like someone flipped a single switch. The path disappeared under my feet. The trees collapsed into one dark mass. For half a second, my eyes didn't know what to do with it. I stopped walking automatically, heart jumping, waiting for my vision to catch up. That was when I noticed how quiet it got. Not peaceful quiet. More like the sound had been muted. I couldn't hear traffic from the street anymore, even though it was only a block away. The cicadas that had been buzzing nonstop went silent all at once. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. Someone laughed nervously behind me. "Did that just happen?" a guy said somewhere to my left. I turned, trying to place voices in the dark, but the shadows felt thicker than they should have. The glow from the city should have been enough to outline people. It wasn't. Then I looked up. The clouds were moving, but not the way clouds usually do. One section of darkness slid across them, smoother and faster, like a shadow passing over frosted glass. It didn't have a clear edge, but it blocked out the faint orange glow behind it completely. It wasn't shaped like anything I could name. Not round, not angular, just wrong in a way that made my eyes keep sliding off it. Someone near the benches whispered, "Is that a helicopter?" There was no sound. No chop of blades. No hum. Nothing. The dark shape moved from west to east, directly overhead. As it passed, the air felt heavier, like the pressure drop before a storm, except it didn't come with wind. My ears popped slightly. I swallowed and felt it in my jaw. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me flinch. I hadn't realized I was gripping it. No notification, just a vibration like it had lost signal and found it again. The shape crossed the park in maybe 3 seconds. The instant it cleared the far side, every light snapped back on. Path lights, lampposts, the old decorative lanterns near the playground. All of it, bright and normal, like nothing had happened. The cicadas started up again, mid-buzz, not ramping up, just continuing like they'd never stopped. Traffic noise rushed back in, too loud for a second before settling. People stood frozen where they were. A woman near the path said, "What the hell was that?" No one answered her. A couple with a stroller hurried toward the exit without looking back. The guy who'd laughed earlier pulled his phone out and started filming the sky, even though there was nothing there now but clouds. I stayed where I was, staring up, waiting for my pulse to slow down. It didn't. After a minute or two, people started talking over each other, trying to fill the silence. Power outage. Transformer. City grid glitch. Someone joked about aliens, but it came out thin and forced. I walked home as soon as my legs remembered how. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time a car passed outside my apartment, I woke up, convinced the sound had stopped again. The next morning, the city's outage map showed nothing. No reports, no maintenance logs. I checked local news sites. Nothing. I went back to the park the following evening, telling myself I needed to see it in daylight. Everything looked normal. The grass was a little worn near the benches where people had clustered. That was it. I tried to convince myself it was a one-off. Some freak electrical thing combined with my imagination filling in gaps. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, I was sitting on a bench near the pond, scrolling through my phone. A guy named Marcus was tossing a tennis ball for his dog a little ways off. I remember his name because he'd introduced himself earlier when the dog decided my shoe was a toy. The lights went out exactly the same way. Instant. Total. The dog froze mid-run, ball rolling to a stop beside it. It didn't bark. It didn't move. Just stood there, staring upward. Marcus said, "Hey," sharply, like he was scolding it. I looked up just in time to see the dark shape again. It was lower this time. I could tell because it blocked out more of the sky, and the sense of pressure was stronger, like something heavy passing just above the treetops. I stood without realizing I was doing it. The shape didn't cast a shadow the way you'd expect. The darkness seemed contained within it, like it was subtracting light rather than blocking it. As it passed overhead, my phone screen went black. Not off, black. The glow disappeared, but the device stayed warm in my hand. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on hot pavement, even though it hadn't rained. The lights snapped back on. Marcus swore loudly. "Okay. Nope, we're leaving." His dog bolted the second the lights came back, nearly yanking the leash out of his hand. Other people reacted faster this time. Joggers broke into sprints. A couple near the pond climbed the path toward the street without saying a word. I stood there a few seconds longer, staring at the empty sky. My phone restarted itself with a chime. I checked the time. I was missing 4 minutes. Not skipped notifications, not a frozen screen. The system clock showed a clean jump. I checked my step tracker out of habit. There was a gap there too. No data, just a flat line. I didn't tell anyone about that part. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing smaller things. Lights in the park would dim for half a second, then return to normal. The air would go still without warning. Sounds would drop out for a beat, then resume slightly out of sync, like an audio track catching up. Once, walking through at dusk, I felt that pressure again and looked up just in time to see the clouds ripple, like something had passed between layers. No blackout that time, just the feeling. I stopped going through the park at night after that. Months passed. I was almost convinced it was over when it happened a third time, earlier than before. Late afternoon. Kids still on the playground. Clear sky. Every light went out. People screamed that time. I didn't see the shape clearly, just a dark movement overhead, faster than before. Purposeful. The lights came back on immediately. No missing time, no phone issues. Parents grabbed kids, someone called 911. I left before anyone could start asking questions. I still live nearby. Sometimes late at night, I hear the park go quiet from my apartment window. Not silent, just muted. When that happens, I don't look up. I wait for the lights I can't see from here to come back on, and I try not to think about how something that large could move that smoothly without making a sound. I still walk through the park during the day, but I never stay after dark anymore, and I don't trust the sky when it looks too still. Every cow in the field was facing the exact same spot in the sky. I noticed it because it was weird enough to pull my eyes off the road, and that doesn't usually happen out there. I was driving a 2-lane highway through central Iowa, the kind that cuts straight through miles of farmland with nothing but corn, soybeans, and the occasional farmhouse set way back from the road. It was late evening, just past dusk. The sun had dropped, but the sky still held some light, that flat gray blue that makes everything feel suspended. I was heading back home from visiting my sister. It was about a 2-hour drive, and I'd taken this route more times than I could count. There was nothing new or interesting about it, which is probably why the cows stood out so much. There were maybe 30 of them in the field on my right. Big black shapes against the pale grass. They weren't grazing, they weren't moving at all. Every single one had its head raised, its neck stretched slightly, all facing the same direction. At first, I thought maybe a truck or a train was passing somewhere out of view. Sometimes livestock react to that, but there was no sound, no headlights, no rumble. I slowed down without really deciding to, just eased my foot off the gas. The cows didn't react to my car, not even a flick of an ear. They were completely focused on whatever they were looking at. I followed their line of sight. Above the field, maybe a few hundred feet up, there was a faint glow. It wasn't bright. If I hadn't already been looking that way, I might have missed it entirely. It looked like a patch of air that was slightly lighter than the rest of the sky, like someone had smudged chalk into the clouds even though there weren't any clouds there. The glow didn't move. It didn't pulse. It just hung there. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, gravel crunching loud in the quiet, and put the car in park. My headlights swept across the field, and still the cows didn't move. That was when my stomach tightened. Animals don't usually ignore sudden light and sound like that, especially not all of them at once. I rolled the window down halfway. The air smelled like cut grass and manure, normal for that area. I listened for insects, for wind, for anything. It was quiet, not dead silent, but muted, like the sound was being absorbed before it reached me. The glow remained. I checked my phone. No service, which wasn't unusual out there, but the signal bars were completely gone. Not even the no service text, just nothing. I looked back up. The glow seemed slightly more defined now, not brighter, just more distinct from the surrounding sky. The edges were still soft, but I could tell exactly where it was. One of the cows shifted its weight. That tiny movement made my heart jump, like I'd been waiting for proof that time was still working normally. Then, all at once, every cow took a single step forward. Not a stampede, not panic, just one synchronized step like they'd been cued. I felt cold along my arms and neck. "Okay," I said out loud to no one. My voice sounded too loud in the car. The glow dimmed slightly. For a second, I thought it was fading, and I felt an unexpected wave of disappointment mixed with relief. But instead of disappearing, it changed shape. Not dramatically, it stretched like something turning sideways. The glow became thinner, longer, angled slightly toward the horizon, still silent. Still no movement from the cows beyond that single step. My ears popped gently, like when you'd go up a hill too fast. I swallowed and felt pressure shift behind my eyes. The glow vanished. Not faded, vanished. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. At the exact same time, the cows exploded into motion. They started lowing loudly, some turning in circles, others breaking into a run toward the far end of the field. A few dropped their heads and started grazing again like nothing had happened. Sound rushed back into the world all at once. Crickets. Distant traffic. Wind through corn. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, breathing harder than I realized I'd been. I waited for something else to happen. Nothing did. After a minute or two, I started the car again and pulled back onto the road. My hands shook enough that I noticed it when I reached for the gear shift. The rest of the drive home passed without incident, but I couldn't stop replaying what I'd seen. I kept trying to rationalize it. Drones, military aircraft, atmospheric phenomenon, anything, but nothing explained the cows. The next morning, I drove past the same field in daylight. Everything looked normal. The cows were scattered, grazing lazily, swishing their tails. No marks in the grass. No signs of disturbance. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. A week later, I was driving that route again, this time earlier in the evening. Full daylight, blue sky. I told myself I wouldn't look at the fields. I did anyway. Different field this time. Different cows, same behavior, every single one facing the same point in the sky. My heart started racing before I even found the glow. It was there, faint but unmistakable, higher than before. Barely visible against the blue, like a distortion more than a light. I didn't pull over this time. I slowed down, craning my neck as safely as I could. The glow moved. Not fast. Just a smooth lateral drift, like it was sliding along an invisible track. The cows turned their heads to follow it, perfectly synchronized, bodies still. I felt sick. A pickup truck passed me going the other direction, the driver oblivious. I wanted to flash my lights to get someone else to look, but I didn't. The glow winked out again. The cows resumed grazing like nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that field, all those animals locked onto something I couldn't properly see. I started paying attention after that. Anytime I drove through farmland, I checked the livestock. Most of the time they behaved normally, but not always. Once, I saw a herd of horses pressed up against a fence, all staring at the same empty patch of sky just before a storm rolled in, except the storm didn't come. Another time, goats on a hillside stood frozen for several minutes, ears angled forward before bolting downhill for no clear reason. I never saw the glow again as clearly as that first night. Just hints, brief distortions, a sense that the sky wasn't as empty as it looked. I tried talking about it once, casually, with a guy at work who grew up on a farm. He laughed and said, "Animals spook easy." I didn't push it. Now, when I drive those roads at dusk, I keep my eyes forward. If I do glance at the fields and see cattle standing still, heads raised, I don't slow down anymore. I don't want to know what they're watching, because whatever it was, it never seemed interested in me, and that feels worse. I noticed it when I leaned forward to kill the engine. I'd pulled into the overlook just before sunset, the kind that's nothing more than a widened shoulder with a metal guardrail and a small sign telling you the elevation. It sat above a winding stretch of road that cut through low mountains, the view opening up toward a valley full of trees and scattered lights from a town miles away. I stopped there, sometimes on my drive home from late shifts, mostly just to sit for a minute before going back to my apartment. I reached toward the dashboard, and that's when I saw it in the driver's side window. My reflection moved a fraction of a second after I did. It wasn't dramatic. If I hadn't been staring right at it, I might have missed it. My hand moved forward, and my reflection followed just slightly late, like a bad video stream buffering for a split second. I froze, hand hovering. The reflection froze too. In sync again. I straightened slowly, heart picking up. The reflection straightened with me, perfectly matched. I tilted my head to the left, then the right. No delay. Okay, I muttered, feeling stupid. Probably just tired. I'd been working doubles all week. I stepped out of the car and shut the door, the window going dark. Cold air hit my face, sharper than I expected for early fall. The sky was clear but already dimming, the sun low enough that everything had that stretched, flattened look. I walked to the guardrail and leaned against it, staring out over the valley. Cars moved far below like slow insects, their headlights just starting to pop on. A few birds cut across the sky, heading somewhere with purpose. After a minute, my heart rate settled. I went back to the car, meaning to grab my phone. That was when it happened again. I reached for the door handle, and in the reflection, my arm lagged. This time, it was more obvious. My hand closed around the handle, and my reflection's fingers didn't curl until a beat later. It wasn't a blur. It was a clean delay, like the reflection was watching me and copying what I did instead of mirroring it. I pulled my hand back fast. The reflection followed a moment later. I stepped away from the car entirely, breath shallow. The reflection did the same, but late. I felt a wave of dizziness, the kind that makes the world feel unreal for a second. I pressed my palms together, grounding myself, and watched the reflection do it just after I had. I wasn't panicking yet, but I was close. "Get it together," I said out loud. My reflection's mouth moved after the sound left my lips. I couldn't hear it, obviously, but seeing the delay made my stomach drop. I backed away until I was out of the reflection entirely, standing near the guardrail again. My hands were shaking now. I shoved them into my jacket pockets and stared hard at the horizon instead of the car. That's when I noticed the light. At first, it looked like a star that had come out early. A single white point low in the sky, just above the far ridge line. Too bright for an airplane, too steady to be anything obvious. I squinted, trying to focus on it. The air felt strangely still. The wind had paused. The light drifted sideways. Not fast, not slow, just smooth, perfectly level, without blinking. I forgot about the reflection for a moment. All my attention locked on that point of light. It didn't leave a trail. It didn't change brightness. It just moved, stopped, then moved again. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me flinch hard enough that my shoulder hit the guardrail with a dull clang. I pulled the phone out, half expecting some kind of alert. No notification, just the screen lighting up. When I looked back at the sky, the light was still there, hovering. I glanced at the car window again without really thinking about it. My reflection was back in sync. I lifted my hand slightly. The reflection lifted it at the same time. No delay. I felt a tight, cold knot settle in my chest. I looked back at the light. It was dimmer now, like it was being turned down rather than moving farther away. The edges softened until it was hard to tell where it ended and the sky began. Then it vanished. Not shot away, not blinked out, just gone. The moment it disappeared, the wind came back. A faint breeze rustled the trees below, and I realized how quiet it had been before. The normal sounds of the world rushed in all at once, too loud for a second before settling. I stood there longer than I meant to, replaying everything in my head, trying to find a way to make it normal. Eventually, I got back in the car and drove home. I kept my eyes on the road the whole way, afraid to look at my reflection in the side mirrors. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The next night I stopped at the same overlook. I told myself it was because it was on the way and I liked the view. That wasn't true. I wanted to see if it would happen again. I parked in the same spot and sat in the car for a full minute before moving, watching my reflection carefully. Everything lined up. No delay. I exhaled slowly and opened the door. Outside, the air felt heavier than the night before. Low clouds moved overhead, catching the city glow and smearing it across the sky. I leaned against the car, arms crossed, watching the valley. Nothing happened. After a few minutes, I started to relax, embarrassed at myself for expecting something. I turned toward the car to leave. My reflection didn't turn with me. It stayed facing the valley for a fraction of a second before following. My pulse jumped into my throat. I moved my arm experimentally. The reflection lagged again, clean and unmistakable. I couldn't look away this time. Fear pinned me in place, but curiosity was worse. In the reflection, my eyes didn't feel like mine. They weren't doing anything different exactly. They just felt focused, like they were paying attention to something I wasn't. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look back at the sky. The light was there again. Same spot as before, same color, same impossible steadiness. The delay in the reflection seemed to stretch as the light brightened slightly. When I lifted my hand, it took almost a full second for the reflection to catch up. I had the sudden, overwhelming sense that the reflection wasn't lagging behind me. I was lagging behind it. The thought hit me so hard my knees felt weak. I grabbed the car door to steady myself, cold metal biting into my palm. The light drifted upward this time, slowly rising until it was just below the cloud cover. The air pressure shifted again, my ears popping sharply. My reflection raised its hand before I did, just barely. A twitch of fingers, then my own hand moved without me consciously deciding to. I yanked my arm back, gasping. The light dimmed. The reflection snapped back into perfect sync. I didn't wait. I got in the car, slammed the door, and started the engine with shaking hands. The headlights cut across the empty overlook, and everything looked painfully normal. I drove home too fast, glancing at my reflection in the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting it to move on its own. It didn't. I didn't stop at the overlook for weeks after that, but I started noticing smaller things. My reflection in store windows hesitating when I turned too quickly. My bathroom mirror feeling just a beat off when I brushed teeth late at night. Never as obvious as at the overlook. Just enough to make me question myself. I avoided mirrors when I could. One evening, I was washing my hands at work when a coworker named Jenna asked if I was okay. She said I'd been staring at myself like I didn't recognize who I was looking at. I laughed it off. I stopped driving that route home altogether and took a longer way through town. I told myself distance would help. It did for a while. Months later, I found myself back on that road by accident after a detour. Without thinking, I pulled into the overlook again. Old habits die hard. The place looked exactly the same. Same guardrail, same sign, same view. I sat in the car and stared at my reflection. Perfect sync. I stepped out, heart racing. Nothing happened. I stood there until the sky darkened fully, watching for the light. It never appeared. When I turned back toward the car, my reflection moved with me, exactly as it should. I don't know why that unsettled me more than the delays. I left quickly and haven't been back since. Sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection in a dark window and feel a brief, awful pause before it moves. It always corrects itself immediately. But I don't look at the sky anymore when that happens. I don't want to know what has to fade for things to line up again. The alert tone went off at 1:34 a.m., and I remember thinking it was probably another sensor hiccup. I was alone in the operations room that night. Graveyard shift, coastal radar station just north of Point Reyes. The place monitored shipping traffic, low-flying aircraft, weather anomalies, that kind of thing. It wasn't glamorous, mostly staring at screens and logging things that never amounted to anything. My name's Aaron Cole. I'd been working there almost 6 years, long enough to know the system's quirks. The radar occasionally spat out garbage data, false returns from wave clutter, temperature inversions, migrating birds if the settings weren't perfect. Usually the software flagged those before we ever saw them. This one didn't. The alert was a clean, priority ping. I rolled my chair closer to the main display and brought up the track. For a split second, I thought I was misreading it. The object had appeared at sea level, about 12 miles offshore. The system tagged it as unknown, which wasn't unusual by itself. What was unusual was the next data point. Altitude jumped from 0 to 65,000 feet in a single update. No climb rate, no intermediate points. Just there. I frowned and checked the timestamp. The jump happened within one sweep cycle, less than 2 seconds. That's not possible, I said out loud, mostly to keep myself awake. I pulled up the raw data feed, just expecting to see corruption. It was clean. Signal strength consistent, no distortion, no dropouts. The track held steady at altitude for exactly 3 seconds. Then it vanished, not faded, not drifted out of range. Gone. I stared at the empty sky grid, waiting for the system to correct itself, maybe redraw the track as something sensible. It didn't. I checked the log automatically. The system had already written the event. Unidentified object, anomalous vertical displacement. I leaned back, rubbing my face. Fatigue does weird things, especially at that hour. I'd been up since noon the previous day. I told myself to document it properly and move on. Still, procedure said to notify the supervisor for anything flagged anomalous. I picked up the desk phone and called Mark, the on-call shift lead. He answered on the third ring, groggy but alert. Hey, I said. We just logged a weird track. Might be a glitch, but you should look at it. He sighed. What kind of weird? Sea level to high altitude instantly. No climb. There was a pause. You see it visually? I glanced at the window behind the consoles. The ocean outside was pitch black. Fog had rolled in earlier, thick enough to swallow the horizon. No, I said. Just radar. Okay, he said slowly. Log it. I'll check it in the morning. I hung up, feeling vaguely dissatisfied. Normally that would have been the end of it. Then the replay buffer refreshed. The track appeared again. Same position offshore, same initial altitude. My stomach tightened. The jump happened again, straight up, instant. This time I caught something else. For a fraction of a second, the signal intensity spiked. Not like interference. More like the return got sharper, more defined. I leaned forward, heart beating faster. The object held at altitude again. 3 seconds. Gone. I checked the room clock. 1:38 a.m. I pulled the CCTV feed from the exterior cameras, even though I knew they wouldn't show anything through the fog. The screens showed nothing but gray static and the faint glow of the station lights reflecting back. I was about to write a second log entry when the door to the ops room opened. It was Lisa, one of the technicians from the adjacent weather unit. She wasn't scheduled to be in that late. You see that too? She asked, already walking toward my console. I stared at her. See what? The alert, she said. My screen flickered, like it lost sync for a second. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I brought up the track history and pointed. Her face changed as she took it in. Not panic, focus. That's wrong, she said quietly. Yeah, I said. That's what I thought. She pulled a chair over and started tapping through menus. Any transponder data? Nothing, I said. No ID, no beacon. She checked another system. Weather radar didn't pick it up, no thermal spike either. As if on cue, the track appeared again. Both of us watched it jump. Lisa sucked in a breath. That's not sensor noise. No, I said, it's not. The room felt smaller suddenly. The low hum of equipment seemed louder, closer. The object vanished again, but this time the radar didn't fully clear. For a moment, there was a faint vertical smear on the display, like a shadow burned into the screen. Then it resolved back to normal. Lisa leaned back slowly. Did you see that? I nodded. She checked her watch. Okay, we should have seen something. A sonic event. Anything. We both knew the implications of that unspoken sentence. Nothing moves like that in atmosphere without consequences. I started a more detailed log, hands shaking just enough to annoy me. At 1:42, the system flagged a fourth event. Same behavior, same timing, almost rhythmic now. Lisa said, "It's like it's testing something." I didn't like that phrasing, but I couldn't argue with it. Then something happened that bothered me more than the radar data. I realized I couldn't remember looking out the window. I knew I must have at some point. It was instinct when something weird happened. But when I tried to recall doing it, there was just nothing. No image, no moment. I glanced at Lisa. Did you look outside at all? She frowned. No. Why? No reason, I said, but the unease settled deeper. The fifth event happened at 1:46. This time, the object didn't vanish immediately. It lingered at altitude for almost 10 seconds. The system began throwing minor errors, not failures, just warnings. Time sync discrepancies, buffer delays. Lisa checked her console. That's strange. What? My timestamp is off, she said, by about 20 seconds. I checked mine. Same. We looked at each other. The object vanished. The room went quiet in a way I hadn't noticed before. The equipment still ran, but the background sound felt muted, like it was coming through a wall. I became aware of a pressure in my ears, mild but distinct. Then, abruptly, everything snapped back. The clock corrected itself. The warnings cleared. The radar screen looked clean and boring again. Lisa stood up slowly. I need to step outside. I nodded. Yeah, me too. We walked out to the observation deck together. The fog had thinned. The ocean stretched out below, dark and calm. No lights, no shapes, no movement. I realized my chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for a long time. Lisa rubbed her arms. Do you feel like we missed something? I hesitated. Yeah. We went back inside and checked the logs. All 5 events were there, perfectly documented. What wasn't there were our notes. The detailed log I remembered typing didn't exist, just the automated entries. Lisa checked her system. Same thing. No manual inputs during that window. We tried to reconstruct what we'd seen, but the timeline felt slippery. I knew the sequence, but parts of it felt like they'd been compressed, flattened. Mark came in around 6. We showed him everything. He stared at the logs, jaw tight. Neither of you saw it visually? No, Lisa said. Any external confirmation? He asked. None, I said. He leaned back. Okay, we escalate this. They did. Reports went up the chain. A few days later, we were interviewed separately by people who didn't introduce themselves clearly. They asked precise questions about timings, perceptions, physical sensations. I answered honestly. Lisa transferred to another facility 2 months later. We didn't talk much after that. The station upgraded its radar software. The anomaly never happened again. I still work there. Sometimes when I'm alone on the night shift and the fog rolls in just right, I get the sense that something is moving vertically through the space above the ocean. Not visible, just implied. I check the screens. They're always clean. What bothers me most isn't what the radar saw. It's the certainty that something happened during those minutes that neither of us fully remembers witnessing. And whatever it was, it didn't seem concerned about being detected, only about being noticed. The fire had burned down to a soft orange bed, the kind that should have been perfect for the night. I tossed on 2 more split logs anyway, more out of habit than need, then sat back on the cooler to wait for them to catch. They didn't. The logs just sat there, blackening slowly like the heat wasn't really reaching them. No crackle, no smoke. Just a dull glow underneath, steady and stubborn. I leaned forward and poked at it with a stick. The coals were hot. I could feel it on my face, but the flame wouldn't rise. It was strange enough that I checked the wood, thinking maybe it was damp, but it snapped when I pressed it, dry as anything. I was camping alone near Alder Ridge, a little spur trail off a forest road in northern Idaho. I'd been there once before years ago with my friend Mason. This time it was just me, a small tent, and one clear September night. No wind. Cool. Quiet. The kind of place where sound carries too well. I added a 3rd log. Still nothing. Okay, I muttered, annoyed. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. No insects. No wind in the trees. Even the far-off creek I'd heard earlier had gone silent. I straightened up, suddenly aware of how alone I was. I glanced toward the tree line without really knowing why. Above it, just barely clearing the dark outline of the pines, there was a dim light. Not bright, not sharp, more like a soft gray dot the color of ash, hovering where the stars should have been. It didn't move, it didn't flicker, it just sat there, steady and wrong. I stood up slowly. At first I thought it might be a satellite, but it was too low, and it didn't drift. I watched it for a good 10 seconds, holding my breath without realizing it. Then it pulsed. Just once, not a flash, more like it inhaled and exhaled light. A gentle brightening and dimming over in less than a second. At the exact same moment, the fire exploded back to life. Flames shot up, tall and sudden, licking higher than they had all evening. Heat rolled over me, sharp enough that I took a step back instinctively. I looked down at the fire, heart pounding, then snapped my eyes back up to the tree line. The light was gone. The forest sound rushed back all at once, like someone had unmuted the world. Crickets. A breeze through the needles. The creek, faint but steady. I stood there for a long time, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the timing. Coincidence. Brain filling in gaps. But my hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop staring at the spot where the light had been. I forced myself to sit back down. The fire was roaring now, perfectly normal, snapping and popping like it should have earlier. I stared into it, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself I was tired. I'd hiked most of the afternoon. I hadn't slept great the night before. People see weird stuff in the woods all the time when they're alone. Still, I didn't add any more wood. I ate my dinner without much appetite, eyes drifting to the tree line every few seconds. Nothing else happened. The fire behaved. The night stayed normal. Eventually, I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut, leaving the rainfly open so I could see the stars. Sleep didn't come easily. Sometime after midnight, I woke up because I felt too warm. At first, I thought the fire must have flared again, but when I unzipped the tent a few inches, I saw it had burned down to embers like it should have. No unusual heat. What bothered me was the air. It felt thick, pressed, like standing too close to a generator or heavy equipment. Not loud, just a low physical sensation, more felt than heard. I sat up and listened. Nothing. Then I realized the stars directly above my campsite looked dimmer, not gone, just muted, as if a thin layer of smoke or cloud covered only that patch of sky. The rest of the stars beyond the trees were sharp and bright. I stared at it, trying to focus my eyes. The dim area shifted slightly, not drifting like clouds, sliding. My stomach tightened. I felt stupid for thinking it, but it was like something large was passing overhead, blocking the sky without blocking the light completely. I watched it move off, slow and smooth, until the stars snapped back to normal all at once. The pressure in the air faded with it. I sat there heart racing, telling myself not to panic. Nothing had touched me. Nothing had made a sound. I was still safe in my little circle of light and nylon. Eventually, exhaustion won out and I slept. Morning came clear and cold. Everything looked normal. No scorch marks, no strange smells, no dead animals. The fire ring looked exactly like it should after a night of burning. If it weren't for how vividly I remembered that pulse of light and the fire flaring in response, I might have laughed it off by breakfast. I packed up earlier than planned. As I hiked back toward the trailhead, I noticed my phone battery had dropped way more than it should have overnight, even though it had been in airplane mode. It wasn't dead, just drained enough to make me frown. About halfway down the trail, I stopped and realized something else. My watch was 7 minutes fast. I hadn't set it wrong. I was sure of that. I'd checked it against my phone the night before. I stood there in the trees listening to my own breathing, trying to remember if I'd woken up during the night again, if I'd checked the time, if I'd felt anything else strange. There was just a gap. Not a dramatic blank, just nothing to recall. I made it back to my car without incident and drove home. Civilization felt louder than usual. Closer. That night, sitting on my couch, I smelled smoke and panicked for half a second before realizing it was just my jacket. The scent had soaked in deep. I washed it twice. The smell lingered. I haven't camped alone since then. Sometimes, when I'm outside at night and a fire burns a little too steady, I catch myself looking up instead of down, waiting to see if the sky responds. The humming was already there when I realized I was awake. It wasn't loud enough to wake me on its own. It felt more like I'd surfaced out of sleep and noticed it waiting for me. Low, steady, almost gentle. Not a mechanical buzz, not a ringing, somewhere between those. If I tried to focus on it, it slipped away a little, like my ears couldn't lock onto the frequency. I lay still and listened. The room was dark except for the faint orange glow from the streetlight outside my window. Rain had been falling earlier, but that had stopped. I knew that because I couldn't hear it anymore. I couldn't hear much of anything, actually. No cars, no wind, no refrigerator hum from the kitchen, just that other sound. I rolled onto my side and pressed my ear into the pillow, then lifted my head again. The humming didn't change. It didn't get louder or quieter. It didn't feel like it was coming from the walls or the ceiling or outside the window. It felt like it was everywhere, evenly distributed, the way pressure feels when you go underwater. I checked my phone, 2:14 a.m. The screen light felt harsh, like my eyes were more sensitive than usual. I turned the brightness down and sat up slowly, listening for any change. Nothing. I stood and padded across the room, barefoot, the floor cold in a way that felt sharper than normal. As I crossed near the window, I noticed the curtains weren't moving at all. No breeze. They hung perfectly still. The humming continued. I pulled the curtain back an inch and looked outside. The street looked wrong, but I couldn't have explained how if I'd been asked. The houses were there, the parked cars, the trees lining the sidewalk. Everything was in place. But the shadows didn't seem deep enough, like the contrast had been flattened. The street light was on, but it didn't seem to be lighting anything. The glow sat there, contained, not spilling the way it usually did. I watched for a minute, then realized I was holding my breath. That's when the humming stopped. Not faded, not wound down. It cut off cleanly, like someone flipped a switch. The silence that followed wasn't normal silence. I know how that sounds, but it's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't quiet the way the middle of the night usually is. It felt empty, like sound itself hadn't fully come back yet. I waited for the refrigerator to kick on, for a car to pass, for something. Nothing happened. My ears felt full, like after a loud concert, except there hadn't been any loud noise. I swallowed a few times, trying to pop them. It didn't help. Then, very slowly, the normal sounds returned. First the refrigerator, then a distant car. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once. I stood there, still holding the curtain, heart beating way too fast. I went back to bed and lay there until sunrise, afraid to fall asleep again. The next morning, everything looked fine. My apartment felt normal. The world sounded normal. I went to work and almost managed to convince myself it had been some half-awake thing, my brain misfiring. That night, it happened again. Same time, same humming, same sudden stop. On the third night, I tried recording it. I left my phone on my nightstand with the voice memo app running before I went to sleep. When I woke up around 2, the humming was there again, steady and calm, like it had always been. I didn't move. I just reached over and checked the screen. The recording was still going. When the humming stopped, I waited a full minute before stopping the recording. The next morning, I listened to it. There was nothing. Not silence, exactly. Just the usual low-level noise a microphone picks up in a quiet room. No hum. No change when I remembered the sound stopping. The waveform was flat the whole time. I tried not to spiral about it. Instead, I started noticing other things. One morning, my neighbor Claire mentioned she'd slept terribly because of a weird vibration she couldn't explain. She laughed it off, but she looked tired. Another neighbor, Tom, asked if anyone else had been hearing noises at night. He couldn't describe it either. A few nights later, I woke up just before the humming started. I knew it was about to happen because my room felt different, heavy, like the air had thickened. I sat up and watched the ceiling. The hum came back, right on time. This time, I noticed something else. My ceiling fan, which I always left on low, had stopped. The blades were frozen mid-spin. I stared at them, then slowly reached for the light switch on the wall. When I flipped it, nothing happened. The hum continued. I don't know why I did it, but I walked into the living room. My apartment felt bigger than it should have, like the walls had moved back a few inches. The hum made it hard to think clearly, like it was pressing on my thoughts. I looked out the front window. The streetlight across from my building was off. So were all the others. The entire block was dark, lit only by that flat, dim glow from the sky itself. I couldn't see stars, I couldn't see clouds, just a dull gray-black ceiling overhead. Then something passed above my building. I didn't see a shape. There was no outline. What I saw was the absence of stars moving, like a shadow sliding across something that should have been there. The hum deepened for a moment, just enough that I felt it in my chest. Then it stopped. The streetlights snapped back on. My ceiling fan resumed spinning, jerking slightly as if it had been interrupted mid-motion. Sound rushed back into the world all at once. I stood there shaking, hands clenched at my sides, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I checked the time. 2:17 a.m. My phone said 2:09. I stared at both numbers until they blurred. After that night, it stopped happening every day. Sometimes it would skip a night, sometimes 2, but it always came back. The last time it happened, I noticed something I hadn't before. When the humming stopped and the silence set in, I snapped my fingers. The sound didn't echo. It didn't even feel like it existed properly, like it was absorbed before it could travel. That scared me more than anything else. It's been a few weeks now. I still wake up sometimes around 2, heart racing, listening for that sound. Most nights it doesn't come. But sometimes, just as I'm drifting off, my room goes a little too quiet and I lie there wondering if the hum has already started and I just can't hear it yet. I noticed it because the camera made a sound it wasn't supposed to. Not an alarm or an error beep, just a faint click like the shutter half engaging, even though the exposure was still running. I was standing a few feet away, hands in my jacket pockets, watching my breath fog in the cold. This was out near Silver Mesa, a high desert overlook about an hour outside town. I'd driven up after work because the forecast was clear and the moon wasn't coming up until late. Perfect conditions for long exposures. I did this kind of thing a lot. It was how I unwound. I checked my watch. The exposure had another 40 seconds to go. The sky looked normal, stars sharp and steady, no planes, no satellites that I could see. The only light around was my red headlamp pointed down at the rocks. The camera clicked again. I frowned and walked over, careful not to kick the tripod. The screen was still dark, counting down. No warnings. No reason for it to be making noise. I stepped back and waited it out. When the exposure finished, the camera displayed the image automatically. I glanced at it, expecting the usual scatter of stars and maybe a faint hint of the Milky Way. Instead, right through the middle of the frame, there was a line. It wasn't straight. It wasn't jagged either. It curved gently like part of a wide arc, bright and clean against the darker sky, thicker than a satellite trail. Too smooth to be an airplane. No blinking brakes, no color separation. It looked deliberate. I zoomed in. The edges were sharp, no diffusion, no sign of atmospheric scatter. It wasn't reflected light or lens flare. I knew what those looked like. I'd spent years learning how to spot mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. I looked up at the sky again, half expecting to see something moving. Nothing. I checked the metadata, 30-second exposure, same settings I always used. No glitches logged, the timestamp was normal. I told myself it had to be something mundane, some experimental aircraft, a tumbling satellite, a meteor captured at a weird angle. Still, my stomach felt tight. I took another shot, same framing, nothing unusual. Another. Normal. I stood there for a while longer, scanning the sky, listening to the quiet. The desert at night has a way of making you feel like you're being observed, even when nothing's there. I packed up eventually and drove home, the image nagging at me the whole way. At home, I pulled the file onto my computer and looked at it on a bigger screen. It was worse there. The curve wasn't uniform. It subtly changed thickness along its length, like whatever made it had adjusted direction mid-motion. The brightness was consistent, though. No acceleration blur, no entry or exit point. It didn't begin or end at the edge of the frame. It just existed there. I overlaid known satellite paths for that time and location. No matches. Checked flight tracking archives. Nothing in the area. I even posted the image to a small photography forum, asking if anyone recognized the pattern. Most people shrugged it off. One guy said it looked like camera shake, even though the stars were pin sharp. Another suggested a drone, despite the altitude and lack of lights. A woman named Renee messaged me privately. "Did you hear anything when you took this?" she asked. I stared at the screen before replying. "Just a clicking sound from the camera. Why?" "Because I have something similar," she wrote. "Different location, same kind of curve." She sent me her image. It made my skin prickle. Her shot was from a coastal cliff in Oregon. Same clean arc, different orientation, same impossible smoothness. We compared notes, different cameras, different lenses, different nights. Same result. Over the next few days, we found 3 more people with similar images, all long exposures, all taken at night, all with that same kind of curve, like part of a massive circle you couldn't see. One of them, a guy named Luis, mentioned something that stuck with me. "I felt like I was late," he wrote, "like I'd missed something but couldn't remember what." That bothered me because I'd felt the same way driving home that night. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. A week later, I went back to Silver Mesa. I didn't really plan to. I just found myself loading the car after dinner, telling myself I wanted another clear sky shoot. It was colder this time, windless, too quiet. I set up in the same spot. As the first exposure ran, I felt a low pressure in my ears, like altitude change without the movement. I swallowed a few times. It didn't help. The camera clicked. I didn't look at the screen right away. I looked up. The stars directly above me looked slightly off. Not dimmer, just less distinct, like someone had rubbed a thumb across them. The pressure deepened, and with it came a faint sensation in my chest, like standing near heavy machinery far away. I forced myself to keep breathing. The exposure ended. The screen lit up. Another curve. This one was brighter. Longer too. It crossed almost the entire higher frame. My hands started shaking. I checked the time. I didn't remember the last minute, not in a dramatic blackout way, more like a skipped paragraph in a book. I knew time had passed, but there was nothing to fill it. The pressure eased. The stars snapped back into sharp focus. I packed up fast and left. On the drive down, my radio cut out twice, replaced by a low static hum that made my teeth ache. It stopped as abruptly as it started. When I got home, I checked my watch against my phone. 4 minutes off. I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next month, the images kept appearing, not just mine. More people started quietly sharing similar shots. Same curve, same lack of explanation. A few mentioned odd gaps in memory. Others talked about sounds they couldn't quite describe. None of us said much publicly. It felt safer that way. I still take photos, but not long exposures anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I'll open those files and trace the curve with my finger on the screen, trying to imagine the shape it belongs to. Whatever made it didn't leave burn marks or crash sites. It didn't announce itself. It just passed through our sky, briefly visible when we stretched time long enough to catch it. And every now and then, when I'm outside after dark, I get the feeling that if I stood still long enough, the stars might blur again, just for a moment, and I'd realize the camera wasn't the only thing that had been recording. The lights outside the bus windows stretched all at once, like someone had dragged a finger across wet paint. It only lasted a second, maybe less, just long enough for me to register that something was wrong. Then everything snapped back into focus. The bus was still moving. The hum of the engine, the soft rattle of the windows, the tired sway as it rolled over uneven pavement, all normal. But the street we were on wasn't. I knew the route too well to miss it. We were 3 stops farther along than we should have been. I sat up straighter in my seat and looked around, half expecting someone else to be reacting. Nobody was. A woman across the aisle was staring at her phone. A guy near the back had his head against the window, asleep. The driver's posture hadn't changed at all. I checked my watch. It was 11:42 p.m. That didn't make sense. We'd left downtown at 11:31. Even with light traffic, it should have been at least another 10 minutes before we reached this part of the route. I pulled my phone out and unlocked it. Same time. No missed notifications, no dropped signal. Everything looked normal, which somehow made it worse. I glanced back out the window. The city looked flatter. That's the only word I can think of. The lights were there, storefronts, street lamps, apartment windows, but they didn't have depth. No glow bleeding into the dark, no soft edges, just clean points of light against a black background. The bus rolled through an intersection without slowing. That caught my attention more than anything else. This was usually a long red light, one of those intersections everyone complains about. We didn't even tap the brakes, just straight through, smooth and steady. I leaned forward and looked toward the driver. His face was calm, too calm, hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward, no radio chatter, no music playing. The bus felt quieter than it should have. Not silent, just muted, like sound was being absorbed instead of bouncing around the cabin. I stood up. The moment my feet hit the aisle, the lights outside smeared again. This time I saw it more clearly. Every point of light stretched into a perfectly straight line, all of them parallel, all pointing backward, like we were moving impossibly fast, even though the bus didn't feel like it was accelerating. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the top of a seat to steady myself. The smearing stopped. We were suddenly approaching my stop. Not approaching, nearly past it. "Hey," I said, louder than I meant to. "This is my stop." The driver didn't react. I moved closer to the front. "Hey, you missed." The bus slowed smoothly and pulled over. The doors hissed open. I stepped off without waiting for him to respond. The moment my foot hit the sidewalk, the normal city sounds rushed back in. Distant traffic, a siren far away, wind between buildings. The world felt louder, deeper, more real. The bus pulled away immediately. I stood there for a few seconds, heart racing, watching its taillights disappear around a corner they shouldn't have reached that quickly. I walked the rest of the way home instead of waiting for another bus. Every step felt off, like the ground had a different texture than I remembered. The buildings looked familiar, but slightly misaligned, like a set built to resemble my neighborhood rather than the thing itself. When I got to my apartment, my hallway light flickered as I unlocked the door. Inside, everything was where I'd left it. Shoes by the door, dishes in the sink, my jacket on the chair. I checked my watch again. 11:42 p.m. It hadn't moved. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at it, trying to remember exactly when I'd last checked the time on the bus. My memory slid right over that moment, like there was nothing there to grab onto. I went to bed eventually, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd missed something important. Not in a vague, anxious way, in a specific, directional way, like I'd been somewhere else and returned without noticing the trip back. At work, I mentioned the bus ride to my coworker Mark while we were waiting for the coffee machine. He frowned. What time was it? "Late," I said, "around 11:30. He hesitated. "Which bus?" I told him the route number. Mark stared into his coffee for a moment. "That's weird. What? My sister drives that route sometimes. She mentioned something last week, said she lost time on a run. Dispatch thought she'd skipped a break, but she swore she hadn't. That stuck with me. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention on my commute. Nothing happened. Everything felt normal. I started to relax, to convince myself it had been exhaustion or a momentary lapse in awareness. Then it happened again. Same bus, same time of night. This time I stayed seated when the lights smeared. I didn't stand. I didn't move. I just watched. The effect lasted longer, maybe 2 seconds. Long enough for me to notice that the reflections in the window lagged slightly behind the bus's motion, like the glass was struggling to keep up with reality. When the clarity returned, we were even farther along than before. Someone near the front laughed softly, like they'd just finished a pleasant dream. I looked at him. He blinked a few times, then frowned, confused, like he didn't know why he'd laughed. I checked my watch. 5 minutes gone. I got off at the next stop, even though it wasn't mine. I walked the long way home, avoiding main roads, trying to shake the feeling that something was following just behind me, keeping pace without being seen. A week later, I stopped taking that bus. A month after that, I ran into Mark again in the break room. He looked tired. "Remember what you said about the bus?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "My sister quit," he said. "She said there were gaps she couldn't explain. Routes finishing too early, too late. Cameras showing the bus in places it couldn't have reached yet." "What did dispatch say?" "They said the footage was corrupted." That night, I dreamed of straight lines of light stretching backward forever, all perfectly aligned, like the city had been reduced to vectors and motion. When I woke up, my phone was on the floor across the room. I didn't remember knocking it off the nightstand. Sometimes when I'm out late and see a bus approaching, I watch the lights reflected in its windows. If they look even slightly too straight, too clean, I let it pass. I don't know where that bus goes during those missing minutes, but I'm pretty sure it's still following the route, just not one that shows up on any map. The compass started acting up about an hour into the hike. At first, it was subtle. I stopped to check my position because the trail forked, and I didn't remember seeing a signpost on the map. When I pulled the compass from my pocket, the needle was drifting. Not spinning wildly, just slowly circling like it couldn't decide where north was. I tapped the glass with my finger. Nothing changed. "Great," I muttered, assuming it had finally broken. I'd had it for years, cheap but reliable. I stuck it back in my pocket and took the left fork, which felt right based on the slope and tree line. The hike was in the Bitterroot Range, late October. Cold but clear. Patches of old snow in the shade, crunchy underfoot. The air smelled like pine and wet rock. I'd planned a day hike up to a small summit overlook and back before dark. Another 20 minutes passed before I stopped again. The trail steepened more than I expected, and the wind picked up. I pulled the compass out again, mostly out of habit. The needle was spinning now, not fast. Just a slow, steady rotation, smooth as if it were being guided by something. I held it still, then turned my body. The needle kept circling, completely unconcerned with my movement. I felt a flicker of unease, but I told myself there were mineral deposits up here. Iron-rich rock. I'd heard that could mess with compasses. Still, I checked my phone's GPS. No signal. That wasn't unusual either, but stacked together, it started to get under my skin. I took a breath, zipped my jacket higher, and kept going. The higher I climbed, the quieter it got. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you expect on a mountain. More like the sound had thinned out. The wind was still there, but it didn't carry. My footsteps felt muffled, like the ground was absorbing noise instead of reflecting it. I stopped again and took the compass out. The needle slowed. Then, very deliberately, it stopped spinning and pointed uphill. Not north, not toward the trail. Directly up the slope toward a stretch of rock and scrub that wasn't part of any marked path. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. I turned the compass in my hand. The needle adjusted to stay pointed in the same direction. I rotated my body. Same thing. Uphill. Always uphill. I laughed once, short and uneasy. That's not how this works. I should have turned around. That was the smart thing to do. Weather can change fast up there, and I was alone. But curiosity got the better of me. And if I'm being honest, something about that direction felt important. Not urgent. Just quietly insistent. I decided to climb a little farther. just to the summit. Then I'd head back. The trail faded as I gained elevation, replaced by loose rock and low brush. My legs burned, my breath fogged in front of me. The air temperature dropped enough that my fingers started to ache inside my gloves. And yet, every time I stopped, I noticed something that didn't fit. The cold wasn't biting the way it should have been. My face was exposed, but it didn't sting. The wind brushed past me, but it didn't feel sharp. It was like there was a thin layer of warmth clinging to me, subtle enough that I kept questioning it. I reached the summit just after noon. It wasn't much to look at. A rocky crown with a few stunted trees and a view of rolling peaks in every direction. Snow-dusted ridges stretched out under a pale blue sky. I stepped onto the flat stone at the top and immediately stopped. The air was warm, not hot, not dramatic, just warm, like standing near a sunlit wall after being in the shade. I pulled my glove off and held my hand out. Definitely warmer than the surrounding air. I checked my breath, still fogging. The temperature difference was localized, subtle, but undeniable. I stood there, heart pounding, scanning the area. There was no source, no steam, no vents, just rock, sky, and quiet. The compass in my pocket buzzed softly against my leg. I froze. It wasn't vibrating like a phone, it was more like a faint hum, just enough that I could feel it through the fabric of my pants. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. The needle was locked in place, pointing straight down at the rock beneath my feet. The warmth intensified for a moment, enough that I could feel it through the soles of my boots. The air felt thick, heavy, like the pressure change before a storm, except the sky was perfectly clear. Then the sound started. Not loud, not external. It felt like it was inside my chest, a low, rhythmic pulse, almost like distant machinery heard through layers of earth. Each pulse made my teeth buzz slightly. I wanted to move. I wanted to run downhill and not look back. I couldn't. I don't mean I was paralyzed. My legs worked. I shifted my weight. But every time I tried to take a step, I felt disoriented, like the ground tilted just enough to throw off my balance. I looked up. The sky above the summit looked wrong. The blue was still there, but it lacked depth, like a painted backdrop instead of open space. The clouds at the horizon seemed frozen, stretched thin. Then something passed overhead. I didn't see a shape. What I saw was the absence of clarity. A section of sky darkened slightly, moving smoothly, silently, blotting out detail without casting a shadow. The warmth peaked, the pulsing in my chest sped up, and then nothing. The pressure vanished. The warmth drained away. Sound rushed back into the world all at once. Wind, distant birds, my own ragged breathing. I stumbled forward and nearly fell, catching myself on a boulder. The sky looked normal again. I checked the time. My watch read 12:18. My phone, which suddenly had a faint signal, said 12:05. I stared at both screens, trying to make sense of it. I knew how long I'd been hiking. I knew when I'd reached the summit. There were 13 minutes I couldn't account for. I didn't linger. The descent felt wrong in a different way. The trail seemed unfamiliar, like landmarks were slightly out of place. A fallen log I remembered stepping over was gone. A switchback felt too sharp. By the time I reached my car, my legs were shaking from more than just exertion. I drove home in silence, radio off, windows cracked despite the cold. That night, I noticed my boots were warm to the touch, even hours later. Not damp, not heated by the house. Just warm, like they'd been sitting near a low heat source. The compass hasn't worked right since. Sometimes the needle trembles when I take it out, even in my apartment. Once, briefly, it pointed toward the ceiling. I haven't gone back to that summit, but sometimes when I'm outside on a cold day and the air feels just a little too mild for the weather, I get the sense that the warmth didn't come from the mountain at all, that it passed through it and through me and kept going. I woke up already holding my breath. I didn't open my eyes at first. I just lay there, completely still, with that tight electric feeling in my chest that only comes from being absolutely sure you're not alone. Not scared in a vague way. Certain. Someone had been standing near my bed. I could feel where they'd been. On the right side, close enough that if I'd reached out, my hand would have hit something solid. The air there felt wrong, like it hadn't settled yet. Warmer, maybe, or just disturbed. I listened. No footsteps, no breathing, no floorboards creaking in the hallway. The house was silent in the normal nighttime way, refrigerator humming faintly, the soft tick of the wall clock in the living room. That made it worse. Slowly, I opened my eyes. The room looked normal. Same shadows on the walls, same dim glow from the streetlight leaking through the blinds. My dresser, my closet door, half open like I always left it. No one there. I exhaled, but it came out shaky. My heart was still racing, like it hadn't gotten the message yet. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. It wasn't there. That sent a fresh spike of panic through me. I sat up too fast and scanned the bed, the floor, the nightstand. Then I saw it. My phone was in my hand. Not just in my hand, I was holding it upright, arm raised slightly like I'd been aiming it. The screen was on. The camera app was open, and it was pointed straight at the ceiling. I stared at it, confused enough that my fear stalled out for a second. The camera preview showed the familiar patch of ceiling above my bed, a hairline crack near the corner, nothing else. No flash, no recording indicator, just the live camera view. I checked the time, 3:08 a.m. My last clear memory before waking up was putting my phone on the nightstand around midnight and rolling over to sleep. I never slept with it in my hand, ever. I lowered the phone slowly and looked at the ceiling with my own eyes. Nothing. I switched the camera to video and checked the gallery. No new videos, no photos, nothing recorded since earlier that evening. I sat there for a long time, trying to replay the moment of waking up, trying to remember if I'd heard anything or felt something specific. All I could remember was that certainty, that someone had been there, close enough to matter. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I told myself it had been a stress dream. I'd been working late all week, not eating great, too much screen time, the usual list of things you blame when your brain does something unsettling. I went about my day mostly fine, but I kept catching myself glancing at my phone, half expecting it to be open to the camera again. That night, I put it face down on the nightstand before bed. I even slid it a little farther away than usual. I woke up at 3:08 a.m. This time, I knew exactly why. The room felt crowded, not visually, spatially, like the air had been pushed inward, compressed. My ears felt full, the way they do before pressure changes on a plane. I opened my eyes immediately. Still nothing there. My phone was in my hand again. Camera app open. Pointed at the ceiling. My stomach dropped so hard, I thought I might throw up. I sat up, scrambling back against the headboard, almost dropping the phone in the process. I checked the screen more carefully this time. The ceiling in the preview didn't look exactly like the ceiling above me. It was the same crack, same angle, but the lighting was off, just slightly. The shadows were softer, like the light source wasn't coming from the street lamp anymore. I looked up again with my own eyes. The real ceiling looked sharper, higher contrast, like two versions of the same image, out of sync. I lowered the phone. The preview adjusted instantly to match reality. I stared at the screen, then slowly raised it again. For half a second, just a half, the camera lagged. The image on the phone showed the ceiling as it had been a moment earlier. Then it caught up. I don't know how long I sat there testing it, lifting and lowering my arm, watching that tiny delay. It wasn't dramatic. It was barely perceptible. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Eventually, the pressure in the room eased. The air felt normal again. My ears popped slightly. I checked the time. 3:11 a.m. 3 minutes gone. I called in sick to work the next day. I didn't trust myself to focus. I spent most of the morning searching my phone settings, battery usage, permissions. Nothing unusual. No new apps, no background camera activity. That night, I didn't sleep in my bedroom. I dragged a blanket to the couch and left all the lights on. I told myself it was temporary, just until I felt normal again. I woke up at 3:08 a.m. anyway. This time I was on my side, facing the back of the couch. My phone was wedged between the cushions, screen glowing faintly. Camera app open, pointed upward, at nothing. I started to cry then, quietly into my sleeve because I didn't know what else to do. The house felt too big, too hollow, like sound would travel too far if I made any. Over the next week, it kept happening, not every night, but often enough that I started dreading going to sleep. Always around the same time, always the same feeling, that someone had been close, watching, not touching. Sometimes the phone would be angled differently, toward the corner of the ceiling, toward the top of a doorway, once toward the hallway, never toward my face. I tried turning the phone off completely. I tried leaving it in another room. I tried powering it down and locking it in my car. When I left it in the car, I woke up with my hand raised anyway. Empty. Still positioned like I'd been holding something. The next morning, my phone was back on the nightstand. Turned on. Camera app open. Pointed up. That was when I noticed something else. My battery history showed activity during the night, small spikes. Camera usage for a few minutes at a time, always ending around 3:11 a.m. I asked my friend Elena if she'd ever sleepwalked with her phone. She laughed and said no, then paused and asked why. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to sound half normal. She suggested a carbon monoxide detector. I bought one that afternoon. It never went off. A few nights later, I woke up to the familiar pressure and decided not to move. I kept my eyes closed. I didn't reach for the phone. I just listened. The room wasn't silent this time. There was a faint sound, so low I felt it more than heard it. A soft, rhythmic pulse, like a distant engine idling somewhere underground. The pressure deepened. I became aware of a presence again. Not a shape, not a figure, just a sense of proximity, like someone standing too close behind you in line. My phone shifted in my hand. I hadn't realized I was holding it. I felt my arm lift slightly, guided, careful, like whoever was doing it didn't want to wake me fully. The sound intensified for a moment, then stopped. The pressure vanished. The room snapped back to normal. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. I opened my eyes. The phone was aimed at the ceiling. Camera app open. I checked the time. 3:11 a.m. I don't sleep with my phone in the room anymore. I don't sleep much at all, honestly. Sometimes when I'm lying there awake, staring at the ceiling, I get the sense that whatever was there before hasn't gone away, that it's just learned it doesn't need the camera anymore, because it already knows exactly where I am. The first night I noticed it, I was standing on the back deck with a beer, trying to decide if the mosquitoes were bad enough to make me go back inside. I'd rented the cabin for a week because I hadn't taken real time off in years. No cell service, no nearby neighbors, just a small lake tucked into a bowl of trees in northern Minnesota. The kind of place where the water goes black after sunset and the air smells like pine and damp soil. It was a little after 10 p.m. The sun had gone down, but there was still a faint glow on the horizon. I was looking across the lake, not really thinking about anything, when a light appeared above the far shore. Just one. Bright white. Steady. About the size of a star, but lower. Too low. I assumed it was a plane at first, maybe lining up for some distant airport, but it didn't move. It just hung there a few degrees above the tree line. I waited for the reflection to show up on the water. It never did. The lake stayed dark, perfectly flat, reflecting the dim sky and the outline of trees, but no streak of light. No shimmer. Nothing. That bothered me more than the light itself. I checked my watch out of habit, 10:17 p.m. I took a step closer to the railing, squinting, trying to get a better sense of distance. The light didn't flicker, didn't drift, didn't pulse. It just stayed exactly where it was, like it had been pinned there. At 10:19, it vanished. Not faded. Not dropped behind the trees. It shut off, clean and instant, like someone flipped a switch. I stood there for a while longer, waiting to see if it would come back. It didn't. Eventually, the mosquitoes won, and I went inside. I didn't think much about it until the next night. Same time, same deck, same lake. I was brushing my teeth at the sink, looking out the window when the light appeared again in the exact same spot. Same brightness, same height above the trees. I spat toothpaste into the sink and leaned closer to the glass. Again, no reflection on the water. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, hoping to get a picture. As soon as I raised the camera, I hesitated. The screen made it harder to judge distance, and I didn't want to miss whatever was happening. I checked the time instead. 10:17 p.m. My skin prickled. That's when I realized I'd been subconsciously waiting for it. At 10:19, it vanished. That night, I slept badly. Not because I was scared exactly, more because my brain wouldn't let it go. It kept cycling through explanations. Drone, aircraft, someone across the lake messing with a spotlight, and rejecting all of them. On the third night, I brought a chair down to the shoreline. I sat there with my feet in the sand, lake lapping softly a few inches away. Frogs croaked somewhere off to my right. The air was cool enough that I wore a hoodie. 10:15 came and went. At 10:17, the light appeared. Seeing it from closer to the water made it worse. The lack of reflection was undeniable now. The lake looked like a sheet of black glass, untouched by that bright point above it. I moved my head side to side, checking angles. Nothing changed. I waved my hand in front of my face, feeling stupid, half expecting the light to respond. It didn't. I felt strangely aware of my own breathing, the sound of it loud in my ears. The rest of the night felt muted, like the lake was absorbing sound instead of carrying it. At 10:19, the light shut off. The darkness that replaced it felt heavier than before. On the fourth day, I drove into the nearest town to restock groceries. At the small bait shop by the gas station, I casually mentioned the light to the guy behind the counter. "Hey," I said, trying to sound relaxed. "You ever notice a bright light over the lake at night? Around 10?" He frowned. "Which lake?" I told him. He shook his head. "Not that I've heard." That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. That evening, clouds rolled in just before sunset, thick, low, gray ones that blotted out the stars completely. I almost convinced myself the light wouldn't appear. It did. Same spot, same brightness, hanging just below the cloud layer like the clouds had parted around it. Still no reflection. The frogs had gone silent. I became aware of a faint pressure in my ears, like the start of altitude sickness. It wasn't painful, just noticeable. 10:19. Gone. That night, I dreamed of the lake drained dry, the bottom exposed and smooth with something bright hovering just above the empty basin. I woke up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing and the sense that I'd missed something important. On the fifth night, I set an alarm for 10:10. I wanted to be ready. I wanted to see if anything changed. I stood at the edge of the dock this time, toes hanging over the water. The lake smelled different at night, metallic and cold. The light appeared right on time. As I watched it, I realized something else was wrong. The trees beneath it didn't move. Everywhere else around the lake, branches swayed slightly in the breeze. Leaves rustled. But directly below the light, the tree line was perfectly still, like a photograph. I swallowed hard. The pressure in my ears deepened. I felt it in my chest too, a faint vibration, low and steady, like a distant engine idling. I checked my watch. 10:18. For the first time all week, the light changed. It didn't move, but it seemed to grow slightly brighter, not enough to hurt my eyes, just enough that I could feel it, like standing near a warm bulb. I took a step back without meaning to. At exactly 10:19, the light vanished, and the vibration stopped at the same instant. The night rushed back in. Frogs started croaking again, loud and frantic. The breeze returned to the trees beneath where the light had been. I stood there shaking, arms wrapped around myself, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The sixth night, I didn't go outside. I watched from the window instead, lights off inside the cabin. I felt foolish and tense, like I was hiding from something that didn't know I existed. 10:17. The light appeared. Even through the glass, I could tell there was still no reflection on the lake. I noticed something new then. My reflection in the window looked slightly delayed, like my movements lagged by a fraction of a second. I stepped back from the glass, heart pounding. 10:19. Gone. That was the night I decided to leave early. I packed up the next morning, telling myself I'd just cut the trip short. No big deal. Still, as I loaded the car, I kept glancing at the far shore of the lake, half expecting to see the light even in daylight. On the seventh night, I was driving home. I stopped at a small roadside motel about an hour away from the cabin. I didn't want to push the drive too late. At 10:16, I stood in the parking lot, keys in hand, staring west. The lake was miles away. At 10:17, a bright white light appeared above the tree line in the distance. Same height, same intensity. I felt the pressure in my ears instantly. I checked my watch, my pulse hammering. At 10:19, it vanished. I stood there in the dark parking lot, breathing hard, surrounded by the quiet hum of highway traffic, knowing with a certainty that made my stomach drop that the light hadn't been tied to the lake at all. It had been tied to me. I drove the rest of the way home that night without stopping. I don't go near that cabin anymore. I don't go near lakes at night if I can help it. Sometimes, though, when I glance at the clock and see it's 10:17, I get the urge to look up, just to make sure the sky above me still feels empty. The radio started doing it about 20 minutes into the drive, right after I left the last real town behind. I was heading west on Highway 50, late afternoon, the kind of road that stretches flat and empty for miles at a time. It was early October, dry and clear, the sun already dropping low enough to throw long shadows across the asphalt. I'd finished a job site inspection near Delta and was trying to get home before dark. I had the radio on low, half listening. Country station faded out, so I reached over and nudged the dial, just enough to catch something else. Instead of static, I heard a tone. Not loud, not sharp. Just a soft, steady sound, like someone humming a single note through clenched teeth. It sat between two stations, perfectly centered, not warbling the way weak signals usually do. I frowned and twisted the dial a little more. The tone disappeared instantly. Twisted it back. The tone came back. I tried that a few times, slowing the car slightly without realizing it. Every time the needle hit that exact spot, the sound returned. No voices, no rhythm, just that single flat note. I told myself it was interference, electrical noise, maybe a tower bouncing something weird across the valley. Still, it made the hair on my arms lift. I left it there and kept driving. The road dipped and rose gently, cutting through scrub and low hills. No trees, just pale grass and rock. The sky was wide and empty, the sun turning orange at the edges. I glanced at the horizon out of habit, then back to the road. That's when I noticed the light. It sat just above the far hills, slightly left of where the sun had gone down. Small, dim, not blinking, not moving. Too bright to be a star, too steady to be anything else I recognized. I checked my mirrors, thinking maybe it was a reflection or another car lining up behind me. Nothing. The tone from the radio felt louder now, even though I hadn't touched the volume. I drove on. The light stayed exactly where it was relative to the horizon. As the road curved slightly, it didn't shift the way a distant tower or vehicle should have. It just hung there, like it was painted onto the sky. I swallowed and reached for the radio again, turning the dial a hair. The tone cut out. I turned it back. The tone returned immediately. I didn't like that connection forming in my head, so I turned the radio off completely. The cabin went quiet except for the hum of the tires and the faint rattle of something loose in the trunk. The light was still there. I told myself it was a planet, Venus maybe. Something like that, except it was too low and the color was wrong. It wasn't warm. It looked white, almost pale blue. As I crested a shallow rise, the light dipped slightly, like it was sinking. My stomach tightened. I eased off the gas. The car slowed, engine pitch dropping. The light continued its slow descent, perfectly smooth, like it was following the curve of the earth. I turned the radio back on without thinking. Static. Then the tone snapped back into place. Same pitch, same volume. I felt it then, a faint pressure behind my eyes, like the beginning of a headache. My ears felt full, the way they do when you're driving up a mountain too fast. The light continued to sink. I pulled onto the shoulder. The gravel crunched loudly under the tires, startling me. Dust puffed up and settled. I put the car in park and leaned forward over the steering wheel, staring through the windshield. The light was closer to the horizon now, maybe a finger width above it. The tone from the radio didn't change, but it felt closer somehow, like it wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. I checked them anyway, pressing my hand against the dash. The vibration I felt there didn't match the sound exactly. I looked at my phone, no signal, as expected. The time reads 6:42 p.m. I don't know why I did it, but I turned the radio off again. The silence felt wrong, too deep, like the world had taken a step back. The light kept sinking. A strange thought crossed my mind then, clear and uninvited. When it goes below the horizon, something will change. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew it felt true. The pressure in my head increased. Not painful, but distracting. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. The light touched the horizon. For a second, nothing happened. Then it slipped below the line of hills. The instant it disappeared, the radio clicked softly, even though it was off. Just a tiny mechanical sound, like a switch resetting. The pressure vanished. The air felt normal again. I took a deep breath that turned into a shaky laugh before I could stop it. My shoulders relaxed and I leaned back in the seat, suddenly aware of how tense I'd been. I started the car and pulled back onto the road, eager to put distance between myself and that stretch of highway. 10 minutes later, the radio came back on by itself. I jumped, swerving slightly before correcting. My heart hammered as I glanced at the dash. The volume was low, no tone, just static. I turned it off again, harder this time, like I could punish it into behaving. The rest of the drive passed without incident. Dusk deepened into early night. The road stayed empty. When I finally hit the outskirts of my town, I felt ridiculous for how shaken I was. At home, I didn't mention it to my wife. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound stupid. I ate dinner, watched TV, went to bed. That night, I dreamed of driving the same road, except the horizon never came closer, no matter how long I drove. The light hung there, fixed, and the tone filled the car until it felt like it was vibrating my bones. I woke up before dawn, heart racing, ears ringing faintly. The next week, I took the same route again. I told myself I was being practical. It was the fastest way to get to the site. Still, my hands tightened on the steering wheel as I passed the spot where I'd pulled over before. The radio stayed normal. The sky was clear, no light. I relaxed, slowly. About 30 miles later, just as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the radio picked up the tone again. Soft, steady. I didn't touch the dial this time. I looked ahead. Far in the distance, just above the hills, the light was back. I didn't stop the car. I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes on the road and drove straight toward it, jaw clenched, pulse thudding in my ears. The light didn't sink this time. It stayed level, hovering just above the horizon, matching my speed perfectly. No matter how fast or slow I went, it held its position. The tone grew stronger, not louder, exactly. Fuller. Like it was filling the space inside the car. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down. No notification. Just the screen lighting up, then going dark again. The pressure returned, heavier than before. My vision felt slightly off, like depth didn't work the way it should. Then, without warning, the light dropped. Straight down. It vanished below the horizon in less than a second. The tone cut off mid-note. The radio went dead. Not static. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered once, then stabilized. I blinked hard, breathing fast, knuckles white on the wheel. The road ahead looked normal, but something felt off. The distance between mile markers seemed wrong, like I was covering ground too quickly. When I finally reached the turnoff to the site, my watch said I was 8 minutes ahead of schedule. I don't take that route anymore. Every once in a while, when I'm driving at sunset and the radio drifts between stations, I hear the edge of that tone again. I turn it off immediately, eyes flicking to the horizon before I can stop myself. So far, the light hasn't come back. I'm not sure what I'll do if it does. I was outside before dawn because my sleep schedule had been wrecked for weeks, and I'd given up trying to force it back into shape. It was just after 5 in the morning, that quiet stretch where the night hasn't fully let go yet, but the day hasn't shown up either. I stood in the driveway with a mug of coffee, still half asleep, staring out at the street. The air was cool and dry. No wind, no birds yet, just that heavy stillness you get right before morning starts moving again. I live in a small neighborhood on the edge of town, backed up against a stretch of scrubland and a shallow ravine. Not rural, but not busy either. At that hour, it felt abandoned. I remember thinking the sky looked wrong. Not dark exactly, not light. It was this flat, dull gray, like the color of old aluminum. No stars, no clouds I could make out. Just a smooth, metallic-looking ceiling stretching from horizon to horizon. At first, I thought my eyes were still adjusting. I rubbed them, blinked a few times, took a sip of coffee. The taste grounded me. Bitter. Real. The sky stayed the same. It wasn't glowing. It wasn't bright. It just looked solid. Like if I threw something hard enough, it might hit it. I stepped off the driveway and into the street, barefoot on the cold pavement. My neighbor's house sat dark and quiet. Same with the houses down the block. No porch lights, no headlights, no sound of early traffic. I tilted my head back. The color deepened slightly just for a moment, still metallic but darker, like brushed steel. I had this sudden, irrational thought that it was lowering. Not moving exactly, but getting close some was something I couldn't explain. My chest tightened, then it faded. Not dramatically. No flash, no sound. It just thinned out. The gray softened into a more familiar pre-dawn blue-black. Stars blinked back into existence, uneven and scattered like they'd been turned back on individually. I stood there longer than I meant to, heart beating faster than it should have been for someone just standing in the street. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than 5 or 6 seconds. When it was over, nothing looked obviously wrong. The sky was normal. The houses were the same. My coffee was still hot. I told myself it was some weird atmospheric thing, light pollution, my tired brain filling in gaps. Still, I didn't go back inside right away. I walked to the end of the block toward the ravine. The chain link fence there rattled softly when I leaned on it. Below, the brush was dark and motionless. No animals, no insects, no wind moving the weeds. I checked my phone. 5:08 a.m. No notifications, no missed calls, battery normal. I went back inside after that, feeling slightly embarrassed by how unsettled I was. Later that morning, after the sun was fully up and the day felt real again, I tried to think back on the color of the sky. I couldn't quite pin it down. Not silver, not gray. Something in between, like the inside of a stainless steel sink. That bothered me more than it should have. The next morning I was awake again before dawn. Not on purpose. I just snapped awake around the same time, heart pounding like I'd missed an alarm that hadn't actually gone off. I lay there for a minute, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The refrigerator wasn't humming. The usual faint traffic noise from the main road a mile away was gone. I got up and looked out the bedroom window. The sky was normal. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and went back to bed. That should have been the end of it. A few days later, I mentioned it casually to a coworker named Eric while we were waiting for a meeting to start. I framed it like a joke, like I'd just been tired. Ever see the sky look kind of metal? I asked. He frowned. Like before a storm? No, I said. Clear, early morning. He shook his head. Can't say I have. I laughed it off and dropped it. About a week after the first time, it happened again. This time I was already outside, sitting on the back steps with my dog, Luna. She was sniffing the air, tail low, not relaxed the way she usually was. I checked the time on my phone. 5:11 a.m. The sky shifted subtly, I almost missed it. The stars dimmed, not all at once, but smoothly, like someone sliding a dimmer switch. The blue-black drained out, and that same dull metallic tone took its place. Luna froze. She didn't bark. She didn't growl. She just stopped moving completely, staring up. My stomach dropped. I stood slowly, afraid that sudden movement might make something worse, though I had no idea what worse meant. The air felt thicker, like the pressure before a storm, but there was no smell of rain, no wind, no sound. The sky looked close again. I had the strange sensation that the space above me wasn't empty. Not occupied by anything I could see, just full, like the feeling of standing too close to a wall in the dark. Then it faded. Again, no drama, no noise. The color drained away, the stars returned, and the sky resumed its normal depth. Luna bolted for the back door, nails skittering on the concrete. She didn't calm down until I let her inside. I stood there alone for a long time after that, staring up, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Over the next month, I started waking up just before dawn without meaning to. Not every day, but often enough that it became a pattern. I'd lie there listening, feeling for that pressure, that quiet. It only happened one more time. The last time I didn't even look up right away. I felt it first, a strange flattening of sound like the world had been wrapped in insulation. My ears popped slightly. When I did look, the sky had already turned, metallic, smooth, wrong. I checked my watch out of some instinct I didn't fully understand. The second hand was moving, but it seemed sluggish, like it was pushing through resistance. I counted under my breath. 1, 2, 3. By 6, the color was already draining away. When it was over, I noticed something small and unsettling. The sound of the neighborhood didn't come back all at once. First the distant traffic, then the hum of power lines, then finally, birds. It was like sound had to reload. That morning, my watch was 37 seconds behind my phone. I'd synced them the night before. I haven't seen the sky do that again. Sometimes, though, when I'm awake too early and the world feels thin, I get the sense that it's still possible, like the conditions just haven't lined up right. And every now and then, when the pre-dawn light hits just right, I catch myself wondering if it actually faded back, or if I just stopped noticing. I'd been driving since early morning, heading west through Kansas on my way to visit my brother in Colorado. It was one of those long, flat stretches where the scenery barely changes for hours. By the time I hit the rest stop outside Oakley, the sun was setting, and my back felt like it had molded permanently into the shape of the driver's seat. I pulled in mostly to stretch my legs and eat something that wasn't gas station peanuts. The rest stop was quiet, maybe 8 or 9 cars scattered around, a couple of semis idling in the truck section, and a picnic area no one was using because the temperature had dropped faster than expected. The sky was a deep orange fading to blue, the kind of dusk that makes everything look softer. The air was completely still. Not even the grass by the dumpsters moved. I parked near the far edge of the lot, rolled my shoulders, and got out. My car door made a sharp metallic ping when I shut it, echoing louder than it should have. With how quiet it was, I half expected someone to poke their head out of an RV just to see who made the noise. I walked a few laps around the lot, checked my maps, and took a few sips of water. Then I sat on the edge of the curb facing my car and the others. I wasn't in a rush. I figured 10 minutes off the road wouldn't hurt. That's when I noticed something strange. My car rocked slightly. Just a small shift, like someone had leaned against it or a gust of wind pushed it. Except there was no wind. I would have felt it on my face or seen it in the grass. The air was perfectly still. My first thought was that maybe the suspension had settled, but then the blue sedan next to mine rocked too. Same gentle motion, same subtle sway forward and back. I stood up. Another car, farther down the row, a silver minivan, shifted the exact same way. A soft creak sounded from its roof rack as it tilted maybe half an inch. I walked closer, scanning the horizon, looking for signs of wind. The trees by the bathrooms didn't move at all. The flags near the entrance hung limp. My hair didn't even twitch. Yet every parked car around me swayed like a mild earthquake was rolling under the asphalt. My stomach tightened. I crouched down and put my hand on the pavement. It wasn't vibrating. It didn't feel warm or disturbed. Just normal, cracked concrete. The rocking grew slightly more noticeable, still gentle, but synchronized, like the cars were all responding to the same unseen force. The semis in the distance moved too, their trailers shifting silently like something was nudging them. No one else seemed to notice. A guy walking out of the bathroom didn't even look up from his phone. A woman in a pickup near the entrance opened her door and climbed in without glancing at the motion around her, even though her own truck moved under her weight more than usual. The air felt heavier. Not in a physical way, more like the atmosphere had developed a pressure beneath the silence. I stepped away from the cars and turned toward the picnic area. Above the rest stop, maybe 100 feet up, something flickered. A faint glow, soft white, almost bluish, gone as quickly as it appeared. I narrowed my eyes, thinking maybe it had been a reflection from a distant plane catching the last bit of sunset. But the sky was dark enough now that no planes were visible, and the flicker came from directly above the parking lot, not across the sky. Then it flickered again. Brighter this time, still silent. A kind of pulse that didn't illuminate anything around it, not the bathroom roof, not the lampposts. It was like the glow existed only within itself, refusing to spread outward. The cars rocked harder for a moment, not violently, but deliberately, like they were responding to the flicker. A low ringing sensation hummed in my ears. Not sound exactly, more like pressure shifting, too subtle to name. The glow pulsed once more, softer, and then vanished completely. Instantly, the rocking stopped. Every car, every truck, frozen in place as if nothing had happened. The air lightened, the pressure feeling faded. The silence returned to normal. I stood in the middle of the lot, feeling strangely exposed. I glanced around, waiting to see if anyone else had reacted. The guy with the phone got into his SUV and backed out without hesitation. The woman in the pickup turned on her headlights like nothing was out of the ordinary. A trucker climbed into his cab, humming loudly enough for me to hear from across the lot. No one had seen anything. Or if they had, they weren't acknowledging it. I walked back to my car, taking slow steps, half expecting it to move again. It didn't. The frame was still, tires resting normally against the pavement. I reached out and pushed the side mirror gently. It moved with normal resistance. Nothing unusual. But as I circled around to the driver's door, I noticed something small. Dust. A fine layer of chalky dust covered the roof and windshield, but like my car had driven through a construction site or a gravel storm. But I'd been on the interstate for hours. No dirt roads, no recent storms, nothing that would explain the thin gray coating. I wiped some off with my finger. It left a smear, but didn't feel gritty. More like powder. I sniffed it. No smell. I checked the cars next to mine. Same dust on their roofs. Same texture. Light enough that it vanished when I blew on it. That's when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out. No service. Not one bar. Earlier I'd had full coverage on the interstate. The rest stop should have been no different. I tried toggling airplane mode. Nothing. I climbed into my car, locked the doors on instinct, and sat there breathing carefully. My headlights illuminated the empty parking space ahead of me. The lot looked normal again. Peaceful. The glow above the rest stop felt like a hallucination. Except the dust and the memory of the rocking wouldn't let me write it off like that. I started the engine. The dashboard lights flickered for a split second before stabilizing. The radio produced a short burst of static even though it was turned off. I hit the button to turn it on, then off again. The static stopped. My hands were shaking when I pulled out of the lot. As soon as I got back onto the highway, my phone buzzed again, full service. Notifications poured in like nothing had happened. I checked the rearview mirror repeatedly for the first 10 miles, watching the sky over the rest stop shrink behind me. At one point, I thought I saw another faint flicker far back on the horizon, just a split flash. But it could have been anything. Distant lightning, a reflection, my imagination. Still, I drove the rest of the way to my motel with the radio silent and my eyes darting between the mirrors and the road. Later that night, after checking into the room, I looked at my car through the window. Even under the yellow parking lot lights, I could see that same chalky dust still coating the roof. I touched it again, just to be sure. Same texture, same odd weightlessness. I slept poorly. Kept waking up thinking the room was swaying or that a faint glow was shining through the blinds. The next morning, every bit of dust had washed off easily with dew, except for a few smudges on the windshield. The car looked normal again. But whenever I pass by rest stops now, even ones I've never been to, I catch myself checking to see if the parked cars are moving at all, if the air is heavier than it should be, if the sky is just a little too bright for no reason. And sometimes, for just a second, I swear I see something flicker above the roofs before it disappears. I woke up with my bedside lamp shining straight at the window. Not just angled toward it, the shade tilted like someone had purposefully turned it to face outside. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, but even I don't knock a lamp around without waking up. And it wasn't just bumped, it had been rotated. The cord was stretched tight across the nightstand like it had been pulled farther than usual. The glow outside was the next thing I noticed. A pale, milky light lingering near the treetops behind my yard. Not bright enough to illuminate anything, not dim enough to ignore. Just a hovering wash of color sitting above the branches like a low, stalled cloud. But the sky was clear. I could see stars scattered above the glow, untouched by whatever was happening near the trees. I stayed in bed for a few seconds, trying to figure out how my lamp had moved. My heartbeat started climbing in that slow, creeping way where your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. The room was quiet, too quiet. Even the old wall clock, usually ticking loud enough to hear at night, sounded muffled. I pushed the blanket aside and swung my feet onto the floor. The boards were cold, colder than they should have been for early fall. As soon as I stood, the pale glow outside seemed to flicker, like it noticed the movement. I could feel Murphy's absence sharply. He always slept at the foot of the bed, but I'd left him with my friend Aaron for the weekend because I was deep cleaning the house. I wished he were there. I took a few steps toward the window. My shadow stretched across the floor and over the bed, strangely crisp for how faint the light outside was. When I reached the curtain, I pulled it back just an inch with 2 fingers. The glow hovered across the treetops in a wide, shallow arc. It wasn't coming from the ground or a house or a car. It didn't flicker like a fire or vibrate like a drone. It just floated. A diffused, pale band of light sliding slowly along the tops of the spruce trees as if trapped there. My porch light wasn't on. The street was dark. And I knew, absolutely knew, that nothing in my neighborhood could cause that color. It wasn't white, not blue. More like the inside of a seashell when you hold it up to the sun. Soft and flat at the same time. I opened the curtain a little wider and pressed my forehead to the cold glass. The glow shifted, not away from me, upward, like whatever was creating it had lifted slightly. The shape changed too, stretching taller, narrowing at the edges. I squinted, trying to see if something physical was causing it. A mist? A reflection? But there was nothing to reflect. No fog. No dew. No beams of light leading to a source. The glow moved again. A slow, steady drift to the right, following the line of the trees as if scanning them. That was when I noticed the sound, a faint, rhythmic clicking coming from inside the house. Close. Too close. I turned away from the window so fast the curtain swung. The clicking was coming from my closet. Soft, irregular tap, tap, tap noises, almost like someone gently flicking the door from the inside. The glow outside dimmed for a moment, then brightened again. I stepped backward until my calves hit the bed. The clicking stopped instantly, like it had been waiting for me to get closer before it decided to pause. The sudden silence made my ears ring. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, keeping my eyes locked on the closet door. It took a few tries to grab it because my hands were shaking harder than I wanted to admit. The screen lit up, too bright in the darkness, and my reflection looked pale and washed out. No notifications, no missed calls, no emergency alerts that could explain anything. I opened the camera and pointed it at the window. The glow showed up, but weaker, almost like the camera couldn't fully register it. I zoomed in. The light shimmered slightly in the display, like heat on pavement. Still no shape, no edges. I switched the camera to the closet door. Before the lens could focus, the door rattled once, a tiny vibration, enough to knock one of my hanging jackets inside. I heard the faint swish. I nearly dropped the phone. I told myself it was the house settling, even though the house only settles in winter and never at 3 in the morning and never loud enough to move objects. The pale glow outside brightened again, noticeably like someone had turned up a dimmer switch. The room itself didn't brighten, but the edges of the curtain lit faintly, casting a soft, warped bar of light across the carpet. I walked back to the window because somehow that felt safer than looking at the closet another second. This time when I pulled the curtain aside, the glow was closer. About 20 feet above the treetops now, and shifting horizontally with smoother motion than before. I thought I could make out a darker shape at the center of the light, but every time I tried to focus on it, the glow seemed to smear around it like a smudged lens. The wind picked up suddenly. Not much, just a thin breeze, but it moved only the trees below the glow. The branches swayed, but the air around my house stayed still. I touched the window, ice cold. The glow paused, held still, then it rose, straight up. No curve, no drift, just a clean vertical lift like gravity didn't matter. Higher and higher until it slipped behind a cloud and became a muted halo. The cloud itself brightened from within for a moment, then dimmed as the light faded. I stood there long after it disappeared, waiting for it to return. When I finally turned away from the window, the closet door was open an inch. I hadn't heard it move. I stared at the gap, forcing myself to walk over and push the door wide open. The light switch snapped on. Shoes, coats, vacuum, nothing out of place, no sign anything had been disturbed. But on the inside of the door, near the bottom where Murphy sometimes paws, was a new mark. A thin, pale streak that shimmered faintly in the lamplight. Not scratched, not drawn. More like a residue, almost the same color as the glow outside. I touched it with one finger. It felt like dry air, cool and powdery without leaving anything on my skin. I shut the closet door and backed away. The lamp was still pointed at the window. I fixed it, turning it back toward the bed, but the shade wobbled loosely like a screw inside had been stripped. It had never done that before. When I finally lay down again, I kept the lamp on. Sleep wasn't an option. Every creak, every shifting shadow made my heart lurch. The glow didn't return, but every so often the room dimmed or brightened by the slightest fraction, as if the light outside was passing somewhere far, far off. Just before dawn, I got up and looked out again. The treetops were normal. The street lamp flickered faintly the way it always did when the bulb was dying. Birds were beginning to move. Everything looked like any other morning, but the lamp on my nightstand, still warm, still slightly crooked, felt like proof that something had been in the room with me before I woke, something that had wanted the window lit, something that had wanted to see inside. I woke up because something under the floor was buzzing. Not loud, more like the soft vibration you feel when a big truck idles outside your house. Except I lived in a rental cabin outside Winthrop up near the Methau trails, and the nearest road was half a mile of dirt away. No reason for any engine to be that close. I sat up halfway, still groggy, trying to figure out if it was coming from my phone. I slapped my hand around the nightstand until I found it, but the screen was off and the phone was cold. The vibration hummed steady for maybe 10 seconds, then faded like someone slowly turning a dial down. The cabin went normal quiet again, just the baseboard heater clicking. I rolled over, thinking maybe it was a weird dream. I'd spent the whole previous day hiking with my friend Mark and his girlfriend, and my legs were wrecked. I figured maybe the muscle spasms carried into my sleep somehow. I was about to close my eyes again when a soft light hit the window. It wasn't bright. More like the sky had turned hazy blue for a second, like sunrise trying to break through fog. I could see the outline of the trees outside, pale and washed out. It wasn't coming from a direction. It was like the whole sky just glowed at once. Then, as fast as it started, it cut to black. Not faded out, snapped off. The cabin dropped back into pitch dark. I sat up fully this time. My heart wasn't racing yet, just confused, the way you get when something doesn't fit with anything you've experienced before. I pulled the curtain back with 2 fingers. The trees looked normal. The stars looked normal. No headlights. No moon. I checked the time. 3:12 a.m. I wasn't scared enough to call anyone, but I also wasn't tired anymore. I swung my legs out of bed and walked to the kitchen to get water. The floor felt weird under my feet. Not vibrating, but like it had warmed up in patches. The cabin didn't have heated floors. I stood there for a moment, nudging my toes around on the boards. The warm spots weren't consistent. One plank was warm, the next was cold, then warm again. I knelt down and pressed my palm against it. It almost felt like someone had been standing there for a while. I tried to convince myself it was some weird heating quirk. Old cabins do things that don't make sense. So I got my water and went to the front door, planning to step onto the porch and look around. When I opened the door, the porch boards were cold like they'd been sitting in winter air for hours. But the dirt past the steps looked off. I didn't notice it at first. I just stared ahead trying to spot any cars or people. Nothing moved out there except one branch swaying slightly. No wind, just that one branch. Then I realized the dirt looked lighter than it should have. Not glowing, just pale, like someone had dusted it with powdered chalk. I stepped down and crouched to touch it. The soil wasn't cold. It didn't feel dusty either, just looked that way. I felt stupid crouching there in my pajamas, so I went back inside. I tried turning on the porch light and it flicked on like normal. The pale look on the ground didn't change, still evenly lightened. I walked to the back window, the one that faced the slope behind the cabin. I didn't see any weird glow or figures or anything like that, but the pine needles back there had the same washed out look, like they'd been sitting under a UV lamp for hours. It wasn't uniform, just patches here and there, like shapes had moved across them and left those marks. I leaned closer to the glass and noticed something else, a faint buzzing on the window frame. Not sound, vibration. The same kind I'd felt in the floor, but softer now. I pressed my fingertips to the wood. The vibration was steady, like a tiny motor humming in the wall. I stepped back. I suddenly didn't want to touch anything. I walked around the cabin room by room, flicking on lights, checking outlets, making sure nothing electrical was failing. Everything worked. The heater clicked on like normal. The fridge hummed. The lights were steady. But every few minutes, something outside flashed. Not the sky this time. Just areas of the forest lighting up briefly, like someone holding a giant camera flash behind the tree line. I couldn't see a source, just the glow outlining the trunks and branches. And every time it flashed, the vibration under the floor returned for a second or two. Sometimes strong, sometimes faint, but always timed with the light. By 3:40 a.m., I started pacing because I didn't know what else to do. I kept checking the clock, expecting more time to have passed than it did. The minutes seemed normal though, which somehow made it worse. If something weird happened with time, at least that would have matched the rest of it. At some point, I sat on the couch and stared at the front door, listening for footsteps or engines or anything. The only sound I heard was a single thump on the far side of the cabin. Not a knock. Not an animal. More like something heavy settling its weight on the ground. I froze. The thump didn't repeat. No footsteps followed. I waited for the vibration, but nothing happened. I turned off the lamp so I could see outside better. The window showed only my faint reflection and a slice of the porch. That pale dirt looked slightly darker now, like it was fading back to normal. Around 4 a.m., everything stopped. No more flashes, no vibration, no strange warmth in the floor. It was like someone flipped a switch and the cabin just reset. I waited another 10 minutes before going back outside. The dirt looked normal again. The needles behind the cabin looked like regular forest debris. The branch that moved earlier was still now. I walked the perimeter of the cabin with a flashlight. I didn't see any tracks, no footprints, no tire marks. But when I passed the back corner, the flashlight flickered, then steadied. I tapped it. It was fine. I tried shining it at the same spot again, and it dimmed a little, like something absorbed part of the beam. Nothing was there, just the air. I went inside after that, locked the door, sat in bed until sunrise. I didn't fall asleep, just waited for the light to come in so I could tell myself nothing else weird would happen. Later that morning, when the sun was fully up, everything looked totally normal. The ground, the trees, the boards, the windows. If I hadn't woken up when I did, nothing in the cabin would have hinted that anything unusual ever happened. I ended up staying the rest of the week because I'd already paid for it, but I kept waking up at random hours thinking I heard that vibration again. I never did. Not after that first night. But every time I set a glass down on the table, I waited a second to see if it would tremble on its own. It never did. The cabin stayed quiet. The only part I couldn't shake was that pale flash across the sky. I'd never seen anything like it before. It didn't feel like lightning or headlights or even the northern lights. It felt like the sky itself lit up from within. And every time I think about that moment, I remember how warm the floor was under my feet, like something had passed beneath the cabin before I woke up. I woke up to this faint white glow seeping through my curtains, the kind of soft light you get from snow reflecting a street lamp. Except it wasn't winter, and my apartment overlooked a backyard with one motion light that hadn't worked in months. For a minute, I just lay there trying to figure out the source. My bedroom clock said 3:41 a.m., and everything felt too still for that hour. At first, I thought maybe it was headlights from a car turning around in the alley, but the glow was too even. No movement, no shadows, just a steady, pale brightness pressing against the fabric like someone was holding a fluorescent panel outside my window. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face, and watched the glow. It didn't flicker, didn't get brighter or dimmer. It just existed, waiting. I don't know how long I stared before I finally swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold. My throat felt dry in that way it does when you wake up too fast. My first instinct was to grab my phone, but the screen stayed black when I tapped it. Dead, even though I'd plugged it in before sleeping. I pulled the charger out and plugged it in again. Nothing. That made me hesitate. I stood there holding the dead phone in one hand and staring at the curtains. The glow made the edges of the fabric look almost translucent, but not enough to show the silhouettes of anything behind them. No shapes, no branches, no movement. Just light. I stepped closer. The air felt warmer near the window, very slightly, like the way it gets near an oven that's been off for a while but is still cooling down. Not enough to be uncomfortable. Just strange. When I reached out and grabbed the curtain edge, the glow brightened in a soft, swollen way, like whatever was behind it sensed the movement. My stomach tightened. I pulled the curtain back fast, and the light retreated. Not out, like it was shining from a fixed point. Up, straight upward, like someone yanked it by an invisible string. It stretched into a thin vertical smear of white and shot toward the top of the window frame, then vanished completely into the dark sky above. No flash, no sound, no fading. Gone. The yard outside was unlit, pitch black except for the faint outline of the fence catching a hint of ambient city glow. Nothing was illuminated. Not the grass, not the shed, not the power lines. It was like the light hadn't touched anything. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer. The backyard looked normal in that bleak, middle-of-the-night way. Trees still. No cats, no raccoons, no wind. Nothing to explain why the curtains had just looked like someone was shining a floodlight behind them. I opened the window a couple inches. Cold air slipped in, carrying the usual mix of damp leaves and distant car exhaust. I listened for engines, footsteps, talking, anything. All I heard was a very faint hum from the highway half a mile away. I stuck my head out. The neighboring houses were dark. No one's porch lights were on. No motion lights had triggered. Even the street lamp at the end of the block seemed dimmer than normal. I waited a solid minute before closing the window again. My phone still wouldn't turn on. I pressed the power button until my thumb hurt. Nothing. I checked the hallway outside my room. The apartment was silent. My roommate Ryan's door was shut. His clock usually made this little whirring noise, an old flip-style thing, but I didn't hear it now. I walked over and pressed my ear to his door. Nothing. No snoring, no shifting. Just this thick quiet. I didn't want to wake him, so I went to the living room. The digital clock on the microwave was off. When I tried the light switch by the couch, the lamp didn't respond. Power outage, I thought, relieved for half a second, until I noticed the fridge humming. Only some things were off. I went back to my bedroom. The clock beside my bed was still glowing 3:41. I unplugged it. The numbers stayed lit for a second longer than they should have. 3, maybe 4 seconds, then blinked out. When I plugged it back in, the digits scrambled before settling on 12 like it had reset itself. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, staring at the curtains. They looked normal now. Just cheap white curtains from Target, fluttering slightly from the draft I hadn't shut tight enough. The warm air around the window was gone. My room felt cold again. After what felt like 10 minutes, I finally crawled back under the blanket, though I didn't feel tired. Sleep felt like something that wasn't available anymore. I kept staring at the ceiling, replaying the exact moment the light shot upward. It didn't fade like a flashlight being pointed away. It didn't blink like someone switching something off. It moved, lifted, rapidly, almost smoothly, but without speed, blur, or streaks. Just a clean, vertical motion. At some point, I heard a soft tapping sound, not sharp like knuckles, more like something brushing lightly against the glass. I sat up fast and grabbed the curtain, pulling it aside. The backyard was dark. I held the curtain open for a full minute, barely breathing. No tapping followed, no glow, only a faint rustle from a distant tree. My phone finally vibrated, one single buzz, but the screen stayed black. I shook it, held the buttons, plugged and unplugged the charger again. Dead. I didn't fall asleep until the sky outside began to lighten. When I woke again around 9, my phone was charging normally at 87%. The microwave clock was blinking 12. And Ryan was in the kitchen making eggs like nothing had happened. He said the power must have flickered overnight. He hadn't noticed anything else. I looked out the window while I poured coffee. Daylight made everything look normal. Grass damp from dew, fence slats leaning at odd angles, a squirrel running along the power line. Nothing unusual. Except when I looked down at the windowsill, I saw a thin crescent-shaped mark on the paint. It wasn't a scratch, more like a pale line, wide as a fingertip, curved slightly as if something warm had pressed against it. I touched it. The paint wasn't warm. The line wasn't raised or indented. It looked almost like discoloration, but too precise to be from moisture. I checked Ryan's window. Nothing, just mine. The rest of the day felt normal enough that I talked myself out of making a big deal about it. But that night, when I drew the curtains closed, I caught myself glancing at them every few minutes, waiting for that faint white glow to gather behind them again, waiting to see if something would drift up the glass and vanish into the sky like it hadn't meant to be seen in the first place. Nothing happened. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up on my own for no reason. The curtains were dark, the room was still. And even though everything looked normal, I couldn't shake the sense that something had been there earlier, just long enough to notice me noticing it, before it pulled itself upward and out of sight. I noticed the shadow first, not the darkness around it. I was driving home from my sister Erin's place, taking County Road 12 because the highway was closed for construction. It was close to 10 p.m., moonless, the kind of rural Colorado night where the dark feels heavier than the air. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel through it. Everything else swallowed up. About 10 minutes into the drive, the road straightened out into a long, empty stretch. I glanced at the asphalt ahead and saw my shadow stretching across it. Not a faint, soft-edged one like you sometimes get when the moon is low. This was solid, sharp, like high-beam headlights shining right behind my car, except there were no cars behind me. I checked the rearview mirror, nothing but black. I flipped the mirror up and down a few times, convinced maybe it had gotten knocked out of alignment. But the reflection was the same, empty road. I eased my foot off the gas. The shadow stretched farther. It elongated across the asphalt, long enough to reach beyond the beam of my headlights, which shouldn't have been possible. Headlights don't make shadows in front of the car. Something behind me was lighting the road. I rolled the window down an inch. Cold air rushed in, smelling like dust and dry grass, but I didn't hear anything. No engine, no tires, no rushing air that would come with a tailgating truck. I slowed from 50 to 40. The shadow grew longer. I sped back up. The shadow shortened, but only a little. I turned my interior lights on for a second to steady myself, then turned them off again. When the darkness settled back into place, I felt like the world had narrowed, like my car existed in a pocket of space cut off from the rest. My hands felt slick on the steering wheel. 3 miles from the turnoff to my neighborhood, the shadow started shifting. It leaned slightly left, then centered itself again, then right. Not wildly, just drifting like something behind me was moving back and forth, but there was still nothing back there. My mirror insisted on that. The road dipped gently, and for a moment the shadow slid up over the small hill ahead before I reached it, stretched thin and distorted like someone had grabbed its edges and pulled. I flicked my high beams on and off. No change. At the next slight curve, I decided to test it. I switched lanes, drifting to the left side of the empty 2-lane road. My shadow followed my movement perfectly, like it was locked to the center of my car. I whispered, "Okay, okay," just to hear another voice. The shadow wasn't just mine, though. Not exactly. My outline was there, head, shoulders, shape of the car, but something at the back end of it didn't match. A faint bulge near the trunk line, a distortion, like the shadow of something hovering just above and behind me, too faint to define but too solid to ignore. I pushed the gas to 60. The shadow didn't fall behind. It stayed exactly where it was, stretched long and wrong across the road ahead. My chest tightened. I kept checking the mirror, even though the view didn't change. Pure blackness. No headlights, no car silhouette, nothing. The road climbed slightly, and when I reached the top, I saw another stretch of asphalt spill out in front of me, a long, straight section with no trees or anything to break the line. My shadow reached the end of that section. Then it seemed to bend upward slightly, like the road itself was tilting even though I knew it was flat. A low vibration hummed through the car, not through the engine, not through the radio, but through the air itself. My ears felt full, pressurized, like driving into higher altitude too quickly. I tapped my ear. It didn't pop. The hum grew stronger for a moment. My rearview mirror vibrated faintly. Then the road behind me lit up, not with headlights. It wasn't warm light. It was cold, pale, almost bluish, though it didn't illuminate anything except the far edges of the mirror. The road surface behind my car glowed faintly, but not the fences or fields beside it, just the asphalt like it was reacting instead of being lit. The shadow ahead snapped sharper, like someone had increased the contrast. I felt the urge to slam on the brakes. I didn't. I kept a steady 55, hands locked on the wheel. Then the hum cut out. Instantly. Not fading, just gone. And so was the glow behind me. My shadow shrank fast, pulling back toward the front of my car, like an elastic band snapping back into shape. Within a second or two, it looked normal, dim, soft-edged, barely visible. I exhaled shakily, but I didn't relax. Something still felt off. Half a mile later, my headlights flickered. Just a blink. Maybe half a second. I lifted my foot off the gas. The headlights flickered again, this time longer. And in that brief dimness, the world outside seemed too still, like every sound had been sucked out of the air. When the lights brightened again, I saw something ahead, just for a flash. Not the shadow this time, something above the road. A darker patch of darkness, moving upward, like something had been riding just above my car and was now rising straight into the sky. I craned my neck to follow it, but it blended too quickly into the night. The stars wavered slightly where it disappeared, like ripples across water. When I pulled onto my street, the world returned to its normal suburban quiet. porch lights glowing, sprinklers ticking on timers, and occasional television flickering behind living room curtains. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the hum, or the vibration, or the glow to return. Nothing did. But when I finally got out and shut the door, I noticed something on the road beside my car. A narrow strip of asphalt, just a few feet long, looked lighter than the rest, as if something bright had hovered close to it recently. Not burned, not melted, just faintly bleached, like the pavement had been exposed to light in a way it wasn't built for. I crouched and touched it. Warm. Just barely, but unmistakably warm. The rest of the asphalt was cold. I stood up fast. Inside the house, my shadow looked normal under the hallway light, but when I walked into my bedroom and turned off the lamp, I froze. For a second. Just a second. My silhouette on the opposite wall stretched longer than it should have. Not much. Maybe a foot. Maybe two. Then it snapped back as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep for a while. Since then, every time I drive that stretch of County Road 12, I keep checking the mirror, scrolling the darkness behind me for any sign of pale light. And whenever my headlights catch my shadow ahead, even in the most normal way, I brace myself, expecting it to stretch into that impossible shape again, pulled by something I never heard, never saw, but somehow know was there. The water was so still that morning it looked more like glass than a lake. I remember that clearly. It was early, around 5, one of those September mornings where the cold sits right on your skin, but the air smells clean enough that you don't mind. I'd driven out to Cedar Basin to fish before work, something I didn't get to do often anymore. I parked near the South Shore, hiked down the slope, and set up near a cluster of reeds where the trout usually bit. There was a faint mist on the surface, drifting in patches. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky had that dim bluish color that hinted morning wasn't far off. The only sound was the occasional plunk of my lure hitting the water and the soft rustle of the reeds. I was alone, at least as far as I knew. I just cast out again, letting the line settle when I noticed something beneath the surface. At first, it was just a tiny point of brightness, like someone had dropped a waterproof flashlight way down in the lake. I assumed it was a reflection, maybe from a star still hanging on above the horizon, but traveled and it moved. It traveled in a perfectly cutting under the water, and it cut no ripple no disturbance, just this sharp white point slipping through the dark, too fast to be a swimmer, too steady to be a fish. And definitely not a boat. Boats don't glide underwater. I stood up, squinting, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the point kept going, and as it got closer to the shore, I realized it wasn't just light reflecting off something. It was its own light, bright enough that it glowed through the water like a spark. Then it stopped, dead stop, as if it hit an invisible wall beneath the lake. The hairs on my arms lifted. The whole air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike, even though the sky was clear. Before I could make sense of it, the light jerked upward, not rising like a bubble or a fish surfacing, shooting, a straight vertical line, fast enough that I barely saw it cross the surface. There was no splash, no ripple, nothing that made physical sense. One moment the light was under the water, the next it was in the air, leaving a faint streak behind it like a camera exposure. It climbed so high, so fast that by the time I'd blinked, it was already above the tree line. Then it just vanished into the sky, swallowed by the dim blue above me. I stood there for a long time, rod dangling in my hand, waiting for something to follow. Sound, wind, anything. The lake stayed perfectly calm. I reeled in my line and tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of drone underwater, but drones don't move like that, and they don't shoot out of the water silently. And who would be flying one in the dark at 5 in the morning in the middle of Cedar Basin? I was still staring at the lake when something else felt off. The mist that had been drifting across the water earlier had frozen in place. Not literally frozen. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't moving. It just hovered there, like time had paused for it. The air was still, yet the mist stayed in these perfect, unmoving shapes. Then, slowly, it began to drift again, as if whatever had disturbed it was gone. I packed up sooner than I planned. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. I kept glancing over my shoulder on the hike back up the slope, expecting to see another light move under the surface or something watching from the trees. When I got to my truck, the radio flickered. Not on and off, just a tiny hiccup in the static of the unused channel I normally kept it on during the early mornings. A half-second skip, enough that I noticed. Then, as I pulled out onto the dirt road, the truck's dashboard lights dimmed. Only for a second, just long enough to make me take my foot off the gas. I drove home without turning on the radio again. For the rest of the day, everything felt slightly off kilter. At work, my coworker Sam asked if I was sick. I told him I was fine, just tired. I didn't bring up the light. I couldn't picture how to explain it without sounding like I'd lost it. The next morning, I went back to Cedar Basin. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof I hadn't imagined it. Maybe I thought the lake would look normal in daylight and I'd be able to laugh it off. But the moment I got out of the truck, something felt wrong. Birds usually chirped around there at sunrise, jays, sparrows, the occasional hawk. That more nothing. Total silence. The kind that feels heavy, like sound is being swallowed. I walked down to the water and stopped abruptly when I saw the reeds. The tops of them were pressed flat, not like they'd been bent by wind, but pushed straight down, like something had hovered just above them. A perfect circle, maybe 4 feet across. I crouched down and touched the flattened tops. They were cold, much colder than the surrounding vegetation. The lake itself looked normal. No glow, no ripples, nothing unusual, but when I tossed a small stone toward the surface to test the water, it hit with barely any splash, just a tiny plip and then silence. The sound felt muted, as if the air itself was dampening it. I didn't stay long. That night, around 3 a.m, Hazel, my dog, started whining. She paced near the back door, ears pointed backward, tail down. When I stepped outside with her, the air felt thick, not humid, just heavy, like walking into a room with pressure built up. I looked up at the sky on instinct. There was a faint glow overhead. Not bright, not like a beam or anything dramatic, just a soft white patch drifting between the stars. Warmer in color than the moon, cooler than a streetlight. It moved slowly across the sky, in the same direction the light in the lake had shot. My breath fogged in front of me, even though the night wasn't cold enough for that. Hazel pressed against my leg, trembling. The glow faded as it crossed behind a cloud. I waited for it to come out on the other side. It didn't. The cloud itself dimmed, like the glow was still behind it, but when the cloud drifted away, the sky was empty. I stayed outside until Hazel tugged me back toward the house. A few nights later, I woke up without knowing why. No sound, no dream, nothing obvious, just that feeling of suddenly being awake. I glanced at the clock, 3:42 a.m. Out of habit, I looked toward the window. For the briefest moment, less than a second, I saw a faint white reflection flicker across the glass, as if something bright had moved outside. When I sat up to look, the yard was dark, totally still. I checked the clock again, 3:45 a.m. 3 minutes gone. Not a long time, but long enough that I knew I hadn't looked away or fallen asleep again. It was just missing. I still fish at Cedar Basin sometimes, but never before sunrise. I can't bring myself to sit alone by that water in the dark, waiting for something to move beneath it. And every once in a while, usually on clear nights, I'll see a faint patch of sky drift. Not a cloud, not a spotlight. Just a soft blur sliding between the stars. Always moving in the same direction. I was sitting in the backyard with my friend Ryan, just killing time after dinner. It was one of those warm, dry summer nights in eastern Colorado where everything feels quiet but not empty. The sky was clear enough that you could see the Milky Way without trying, and we were just leaning back in a couple of old lawn chairs my landlord left behind. We weren't doing anything special, just talking about work, the usual stuff. At one point, Ryan stopped mid-sentence and squinted upward. "Hey," he said, lifting his chin, "that star's weird." I followed his gesture. At first, I didn't even know which one he meant. There were a lot of stars, and I wasn't exactly an expert, but he kept pointing until I found it, a bright white dot a little above the tree line to the west. "What's weird about it?" I asked. "It keeps blinking?" "No, not blinking, something else." I stared at it. It didn't look like much at first. But the longer I watched, the more I noticed it wasn't twinkling like a normal star. The brightness was changing, but not randomly. It was rising and lowering in an actual pattern. Soft, bright, dim, soft, bright, dim, steady, like a slow heartbeat. I opened my mouth to say something when Ryan said, "It's doing that on purpose, right?" I almost laughed, but I didn't. Something about the rhythm made my skin tighten a little. Stars didn't pulse like that. At least not stars I'd ever seen. We watched it for another 30 seconds or so. It didn't move, didn't drift, just pulsed. Then it stopped entirely. It held steady like any other star. "Well," Ryan said, exhaling. "Okay then." We both tried to shrug it off, but the mood shifted. The yard felt too still, the air too warm. I kept glancing back up at that star, even though I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But once you notice something off, you can't unsee it. After a few minutes, Ryan checked his phone. "I should head out," he said. He lived a few blocks down the street and usually walked when he came over. I told him I'd walk part of the way with him because I wasn't tired yet. We left my yard and started down the sidewalk. Houses were dark, most people already in bed. The streetlights weren't bright, more of a dim amber glow, and they didn't fill the gaps between the poles. It made the spaces between them feel darker than usual. I noticed the star again when we reached the corner. It had started pulsing again. "Dude, look," I said. Ryan groaned but turned around anyway. "Seriously?" We watched it for maybe 20 seconds. Pulse, dim, pulse, dim. "Let's keep walking," he muttered. "I don't like it." We kept going, but I could tell he was watching the ground on purpose, just so he wouldn't have to look up again. A few houses down, the cicadas suddenly cut out. Not slowly, just gone all at once, like someone hit mute on the whole street. Ryan stopped walking. "Did you hear?" "Yeah." He looked at me, uncertain. I didn't say anything because I didn't trust my voice not to shake a little. The silence felt thick. I could hear my own heartbeat, which I usually never notice. Then the streetlight above us flickered once. Not out, just a momentary dip. We looked at each other again. "Maybe a transformer?" I said, though it sounded weak. Before he could reply, a shape crossed overhead. I didn't see the whole thing, just a brief, dark silhouette gliding across the sky, blocking part of the stars as it went. No noise, no wind. Nothing to tell how big or close it was, just a smooth shadow passing above the neighborhood. Ryan swore under his breath. We both looked up at the pulsing star again, but it wasn't pulsing anymore. It was gone. Not dimmed, not faded. Gone. We stood there for maybe a minute, not moving. The cicadas started again, but it didn't help. Their sound felt thin, like background noise in a video instead of something alive. "I'm going home," Ryan said quietly. "I'll text you." I watched him leave, but I didn't head back to my house right away. I don't know why. Something felt unfinished, like if I moved too soon, I'd miss whatever came next. A breeze picked up, hot, dry, not cooling at all. When it brushed past me, I felt a faint pressure against my ears, almost like a plane passing overhead, except the air stayed completely still after. No sound followed, no plane. I looked up at where the star had been, nothing but regular sky. But as I started walking back toward my house, I noticed something else. My shadow. Under the nearby streetlight, it looked normal at first. Then, as I stepped forward, it lengthened unnaturally far behind me, longer than the streetlight should have cast. And the streetlight wasn't flickering. I stopped walking. My shadow didn't. For half a second, maybe less, it lagged, like the ground beneath me was catching up. Then it snapped back into place. I actually gasped. It felt like the bottom dropped out of my stomach. Everything seemed to return to normal after that. My shadow looked fine. The streetlight glowed steadily. But every step back to my driveway felt like wading through a bad dream, where your legs don't quite work right. When I got inside, I locked the door without thinking. I checked the windows. I checked the backyard again through the glass. The sky looked totally ordinary. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I went to brush my teeth, and when I walked back into the living room, I noticed a faint light on the ceiling. A soft circular reflection, like someone standing outside, was shining a weak flashlight upward through the window. I pulled the blinds open fast, but nothing was there. Just my yard, my fence, the neighbor's shed. The reflection on the ceiling faded immediately. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing that steady, unnatural pulse in the sky. The rhythm of it. The way it looked intentional. The next morning, Ryan texted me saying he didn't want to talk about it, which was weird because he's usually the type to send 20 messages about anything weird that happens. As the day went on, I checked the sky a few more times without really meaning to. The stars looked normal that night. Completely normal. No pulses, no shapes, no shadows acting wrong. But sometimes when I'm outside and letting my eyes adjust, I feel myself staring at the same patch of sky where that star had been, half expecting it to blink back on. Not twinkling, just waiting. The notification popped up on my phone at 2:17 a.m. A single line from my security app that said, "Motion detected, backyard." I only checked it because I was already half awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the pipes tick in the walls. I sat up and opened the live feed. The screen showed the usual view of my yard. Patchy grass, the old maple tree by the fence, and the corner of the shed where the paint had started peeling. Everything looked still. No raccoons, no stray cats, no person creeping around, just the faint glow from the neighbor's porch light bleeding in from the side. Then I scrubbed back a few seconds to see what triggered it. There was a soft flash. Not a bright burst, not like a camera strobe. More like the yard briefly filled with pale light, as if something had reflected off metal and bounced through the space. It lasted maybe half a second. The tree and fence glowed and then went normal again. No source, no reflection point, just sudden light and darkness. I noticed the timestamp jump from 2:16:22 to 2:17:22. Exactly 1 minute missing. I frowned at my screen, thumb hovering over the playback bar. The app had glitched before, but never like that. Usually it just stuttered or froze for a second. I rewound it again, slower this time. Same thing. Normal night, then the faint flash, then the time skipping ahead. I pushed the covers back and slipped out of bed, trying not to wake my dog, Miko, curled at the foot. My apartment was cold enough that the tile made my feet tense up when I stepped into the hallway. The backyard door was locked. I checked it anyway. Then I flicked on the porch light and peered through the glass. Nothing looked different. The grass was still wet from the earlier mist. The air outside hung heavy and cool, and the neighbor's wind chimes clinked weakly in the distance. I slid the door open a few inches. The night air rolled in, damp and quiet. No smell of smoke, no odd chemical scent, just the faint earthy smell of wet soil. I stepped out onto the concrete slab and stood there, listening. No insects, no distant traffic. Even the usual hum from the power lines near the road felt quieter than normal. I checked the yard with my phone's flashlight, sweeping it slowly across the fence line, the base of the tree, the side of the shed. The beam caught on nothing unusual. No flattened grass, no marks, no objects I didn't recognize. Still, that light bothered me. I went back inside and sat on the couch, staring at the camera feed again. It had returned to normal, timestamp advancing steadily. The yard looked boring and calm, like it had always been. Around 2:40, I noticed something else. The wind chimes stopped completely. Not slowed, just stopped. The leaves on the tree didn't twitch. The faint breeze I'd felt earlier was gone. The camera view showed the yard frozen like a still photo. Then the screen flickered, not fully. Just a thin horizontal band of distortion slid across the image and vanished. I leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "Come on," I muttered. Miko lifted her head and let out a low, uncertain huff. That wasn't normal for her. She stayed quiet unless someone knocked. I glanced toward the back door again, listening. There was a faint sound outside. Not footsteps. Not quite. More like a soft shifting, almost like fabric brushing over grass, slow and steady. I held my breath and watched the screen. Nothing moved. No shadows crossed the yard. No figure passed through frame. Then the faint glow returned. This time it wasn't a flash. It hung for a second, illuminating a patch of grass near the fence about 5 feet in diameter. It didn't cast hard shadows, just a dull, pale wash of light that felt slightly out of place. The timestamp flickered again, 2:41 to 2:42:3. Another missing minute. My stomach tightened. I grabbed a hoodie and slipped my shoes on, even though every part of me said I shouldn't go back out there. I unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch again. The air felt thicker now. Not humid exactly, just heavier, like it pushed back slightly when I moved forward. I stood on the edge of the concrete, staring into the yard. The patch where the light had appeared looked normal again. The grass stood upright, glistening faintly. No scorch, no impression, no sign it had been lit up at all. But the quiet was wrong. Even when nothing happened, there was usually background noise. Crickets, traffic, air moving. This felt like being inside a paused moment. I took a slow step off the porch. The grass gave a soft crunch under my shoe, and the sound seemed louder than it should have been. I moved another step closer to the fence and waited. A low hum pulsed through the air, not loud, barely there, like a distant engine miles away, except it didn't rise or fall. It just existed, steady and flat. I glanced upward. The sky was cloudy, low sheets of gray drifting lazily over a barely visible moon. No aircraft lights, no stars. The hum faded, and the air went dead still again. I backed up toward the porch, unease settling deeper in my bones. Inside, I checked the camera once more. The feed had stabilized. No glow, no flicker, just the yard as it always looked. I didn't sleep much after that. Every tiny sound made me shift my eyes toward the back door. Miko refused to leave my side. By morning, the sky had turned pale and hazy, the kind of gray that made everything feel muted. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and looked around for anything out of place. The yard looked entirely ordinary. No marks, no dents, no broken plants, not even disturbed dirt. I pulled up the recording again on my phone as I stood there. The flashes and skipped minutes remained. Everything in between showed the yard waiting, empty and unbothered. Around 9:30, I noticed the maple tree casting an odd shadow line across the lawn, perfectly straight, sharper than the others. It slowly softened as the sun shifted, then disappeared. I told myself it was just the angle of light. Still, I left the camera app open all day. Nothing else happened. No alerts, no strange flashes. By evening, I almost convinced myself the whole thing had been a system glitch mixed with poor sleep. But when I checked the yard one last time before bed, I noticed the grass near the fence swayed slightly, even though the rest of the yard remained still. No wind, no sound. Just that small patch moving slowly, like something had passed through it moments before. I watched it for a long time until it stilled again. The camera stayed silent through the night after that. No more flashes, no skipped time. But every time I glanced at the dark window, I had the uneasy sense that something had already figured out how my yard looked from above and was deciding when to come back. I heard the gravel crunch behind me before I even realized how quiet everything had gotten. It was one of those early fall evenings where the air felt a little damp and cool, but not cold yet, and I had taken my usual walking path through the wooded trail behind the old neighborhood near Lake Morel. I lived a few blocks away in a small rental with peeling paint and a fence that leaned slightly, and most nights I walked the same loop just to clear my head after work. My name is Travis, and I worked maintenance at a community college. Nothing weird ever happened on that trail before. Kids rode bikes there during the day. Dog walkers used it in the mornings. It felt normal, familiar. So when I heard footsteps crunching close behind me, steady and paced like someone matching my stride, I figured it was a jogger or another walker coming up from behind. I shifted a little to the right side of the path to make room. The footsteps didn't pass me, they stayed right behind. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Each step landed about a second after mine, too perfect to be random. I slowed down slightly, expecting whoever it was to either slow to or come around me. The sound kept pace, same distance. That tight feeling started creeping into my chest, the kind where your body reacts before your brain catches up. I stopped completely. The footsteps stopped too. I waited. No voice, no cough, no shuffle of someone adjusting their bag or phone. Just absolute quiet. I looked over my shoulder. There was no one there. The trail behind me curved slightly and dipped into a thicker patch of trees, but I could clearly see 5 or 6 yards back. Empty path. No movement. No rustle. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. My heart picked up. The air felt heavier, almost like the humidity had thickened around me. I let out a slow breath and told myself it was just someone stepping off the path or cutting through the woods. Still, I stayed still, watching the trees. That's when I noticed a faint glow. It wasn't bright, not even sharp. Just a dim, soft light moving between the trunks, low to the ground and drifting away from the path. Almost like someone carrying a covered lantern deeper into the woods. It moved slowly and smoothly, too smooth for a flashlight beam. No shaking, no sway. I stared at it, trying to find the source. No silhouette, no outline of a person. Just the light itself sliding away and fading as it went. Then it disappeared completely. The woods went dark again. Not normal dark, just flat shadow. I swallowed and turned forward, telling myself to just keep walking and not overthink it. As I started moving again, my pulse still felt uneven. The trail ahead looked the same as always, narrow and cracked in places, scattered with dry leaves and small stones. After about 30 seconds, I heard it again. Crunch, crunch, footsteps, same distance, same rhythm. I didn't even want to turn this time. I just kept walking, every sense tuned toward the sound behind me. Each step felt louder now, like the gravel wanted to announce itself. I glanced to my right, into the trees, searching for that glow again, but everything stayed dark. The path curved uphill slightly, and the tree line grew tighter. The air felt strangely still, like even the usual night breeze had backed off. The footsteps stayed perfectly matched to mine. I finally forced myself to turn around slowly. Nothing. The trail behind me looked deserted. No shapes, no outline of anyone stepping off, no hint of movement. But right as I started to turn forward again, that soft glow flickered once more behind a cluster of trees to the left. Not bright enough to light anything around it, just its own dull presence. It slid along the ground a few feet, then slowly dimmed. I stopped again, staring toward that spot. My phone buzzed in my pocket suddenly, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I pulled it out, half relieved to see a normal notification. It was just a text from my sister asking if I'd fed her cat yet. The screen light lit my hands and the trail right in front of me. When I looked back toward the trees, the glow was gone. I checked the time. 8:47 p.m. Still early enough that something like this shouldn't feel so intense, but everything about the trail felt wrong now. I decided to head back toward the street where the porch lights and passing cars were. I turned around and started walking the opposite direction, quickening my pace. After 3 steps, the crunching came back. Behind me. Again. Closer this time. My shoulders tensed and my grip on my phone tightened. I didn't run. I don't know why. Maybe some stubborn instinct told me not to look afraid, but every step felt heavier, like I was walking through thick air. Crunch, crunch. Then nothing. Silence again. No birds, no wind, no trees shifting, just the distant hum of traffic somewhere far off and the faint ringing in my own ears. I turned slowly. No one. Just that empty path and dim woods. This time, the glow appeared ahead of me instead of behind. It hovered near the tree line about 15 feet off the trail, faint and pale, not round or defined. Just a soft blur of light that didn't match anything natural. It hung there for a few seconds, unmoving, like it was observing the path. Then it began drifting sideways, sliding behind one trunk, then another, still smooth and soundless. I stood frozen, my eyes locked on it, trying to process what I was actually seeing. It didn't illuminate the leaves, it didn't cast shadows, it just existed. My skin prickled all over. After a moment, the glow dimmed until it blended into the blackness and vanished. The woods returned to their normal look, but the feeling hadn't changed. If anything, it felt heavier now, like something lingered just beyond sight. I took a few steps backward, then turned and walked quickly toward the edge of the trail where the trees thinned. The sound of the gravel shifted as I moved faster, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard another set of footsteps again, but they faded quickly. When the first street lamp came into view, throwing a yellow patch of light onto the sidewalk, I felt my chest loosen slightly. The instant I stepped off the trail and onto pavement, the air didn't feel as dense anymore. Normal night sounds returned, a dog barking, a car door slamming somewhere, wind brushing through leaves. I glanced back at the entrance to the trail. It looked completely ordinary. No glow, no movement, just a dark stretch of trees that felt like it had swallowed something and wasn't giving it back. I walked the rest of the way home without stopping once, my mind replaying the timing of those footsteps and how they had mirrored my own. When I reached my house, I stood on the porch a moment, keys still in hand, listening to the familiar creak of the old siding and the hum of the streetlight overhead. Everything felt normal again. Almost too normal. But when I looked down at my shoes, I noticed small bits of gravel clinging to the soles more than usual, like I'd been standing in that same spot longer than I remembered. I brushed it off, unlocked the door, and went inside. The house smelled like detergent and dust and the faint scent of my sister's cat food. Still safe. Still real. Outside the window, the tree line sat motionless, the trail hidden in darkness. And for a long time that night, I kept expecting to hear those steady footsteps crunching up my driveway, matching my own every step just out of view. My headlights swept across the quiet street as I eased backward out of my driveway, the usual early morning routine I'd done 1,000 times. The beam caught something just above my neighbor's roofline, a pale shape hanging low and still, like it was resting on the air itself. It wasn't bright, just faint enough to see clearly against the dark sky. When I stopped the car out of instinct, the shape vanished. It didn't streak away or fade slowly. It was just gone. I sat there with my foot still pressed on the brake, staring at the roof of David Romero's place, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. The rest of the street looked normal. Porch lights glowed the way they always did. No sounds, no movement. The air felt heavy, though, like before rain, even though the forecast had called for clear skies. I reversed a little more, checking the mirror, then glanced back up. Nothing. Just shingles, an old antenna, and the dull outline of the tree behind his yard. My name is Marissa Doyle. I lived in a small cul-de-sac in eastern Oregon, not far from the edge of town where everything turned into scrub and fields. It was just after 5 in the morning, and I was heading to my shift at the bakery. Still half asleep, still stiff, still trying to wake up. Once I pulled fully onto the street, I paused again. Something about the air felt off. No wind, no birds, no usual low hum of distant traffic, just stillness. I told myself I'd caught a weird reflection, or my eyes were playing tricks in the dark. I turned the car toward the main road and drove off, but I kept glancing back in my mirror for a few blocks until the neighborhood faded behind me. The road was empty. Streetlights flickered over the asphalt, and I tried sinking back into normal thoughts like coffee and deadlines and the smell of fresh bread. But the image of that shape stayed fixed in my head. Not round, not sharp, just a dull outline with no clear edges. When I reached the first intersection, my radio switched to static without me touching it. A low, steady interference filled the car. I turned the knob down. The moment the volume dropped, the static stopped too. I frowned and tested it again. Silence. I drove on. The sky slowly lightened at the edges, that pale gray before sunrise. Just as the first hint of pink crept across the horizon, a soft glow reflected on my windshield like a passing headlight. But no car came the other way. The road ahead stayed empty. Later, during my break, I caught myself staring out the bakery window too long. My coworker Lena asked if I was all right. I nodded and said I was just tired. I didn't mention the shape above David's roof. It felt ridiculous even in my own mind. By the time I got home mid-morning, the sky was bright and clear. I pulled into my driveway slowly, eyes drifting upward without thinking. Nothing hovered over any rooftops. Everything looked normal again. I went inside, made a late breakfast, and tried to shake the feeling. But as the hours passed, small things kept feeling slightly off. My phone froze twice. The hallway clock stopped for a few minutes, then resumed. Outside, the air stayed strangely still. Around dusk, when the lights started to soften and the sky darkened, I stepped out onto my porch for fresh air. A thin vibration passed through the ground, faint but noticeable under my feet, like distant machinery. It only lasted a few seconds. I turned my head toward the rooftops across the street. There it was again. Low above David's house, the same dull shape hovered quietly. It didn't glow exactly. It wasn't dark either. Just a heavy presence against the sky, like a void that absorbed what little light touched it. My breath caught. I didn't move. It hovered for several moments, perfectly still. No sound, no motion, just presence. Then it slid backward, slow and smooth, until it slipped behind the line of trees and vanished. I checked the house windows. No one else seemed to notice. David's porch light clicked on and off as usual. A dog barked somewhere farther down the street. Normal life continued. I stayed outside longer than I should have, feeling watched without any clear reason. The air pressed thick around me, and that soft electric feeling returned, prickling along my arms. When I finally went back inside, I locked the door and sat on the couch, heart still beating heavier than normal. I tried distracting myself with TV, but the screen flickered once, then steadied. Later that night, just before I fell asleep, I found myself standing by the bedroom window, staring out at the rooftops again. The neighborhood lay quiet. Street lamps hummed faintly. No shapes lingered in the sky this time, but the silence felt deliberate. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the faint sound of shingles shifting. Not wind, just a soft scrape overhead. I held my breath, listening. The noise stopped. Outside, a weak glow crept across my ceiling for a second, then disappeared. I didn't look out the window. When morning finally came, the sky looked ordinary again. Birds chirped like nothing had ever happened. Cars rolled past the house and neighbors watered their lawns. And still, every time I reversed out of my driveway after that, my eyes drifted to that same patch of sky above David's roof, waiting to see if something would quietly hover there again and pretend it was never real.